Okay. I do believe I have this correct now. Beatrice, it's your presentation at this point.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Commissioners, residents. As promised, I did deliver some numbers for you, year-to-date actuals. I do want to point out, which I'm sure if any of you had a chance to look at them, there's things that probably caught your attention. This is a working report, meaning these numbers will change. I still haven't clarified and gotten through everything. So there are, well, let me go back. So I don't want to bore you with Accounting 101, but usually what you see when you have a financial report is you'll have a balance sheet which shows your assets, your cash, and your liabilities, things that you owe. So what you have and what you owe, and then you get the statement of revenues and expenditures, which is what I provided. So it's incomplete. And the reason why it's incomplete is because I'm still sorting through some very painstaking accruals. What happened was that your previous accounting person really kind of ran this village more like a business than a local government. There's government accounting, so things, usually we work on a cash basis, and he was kind of doing it more of on an accrual basis, which is just, it's different, it's apples and oranges. So a lot of some expenses, and I'll just name a few off the top of my head, things like your commercial liability, what we pay for property and liability insurance. It's on your balance sheet. So we paid it, it's paid for, we're good, but he didn't expense it. It wasn't applied to, for example, the auto insurance isn't applied to the police cars, the police department. It isn't applied to your roads. So the things that were out, so I'm still allocating things, so it's still moving. So the report that I presented represents probably 85% of your year-to-date expenditures, possibly more. So these are just things that I had discussed previously, that it's just procedural. You set these things up, and then when the bill comes for your car insurance, you know what cars you have, you know what departments to code it to, and you move forward. I'm still cleaning up because what's going to happen is we're going to go through this RFP process of getting new auditors. By the time they have a month to put in their proposals, we'll rank them, we'll make our recommendations to council. They will choose the best fit, not necessarily by the lowest bid, but whoever's most qualified. At that point, I'll have finished the 2016 accruals, these things that I just talked about that I need to put in place. In the meantime, I'll have that ready to give them, and so what I predict is that we'll probably be doing a simultaneous audit, which will run 2016 and 2017, kind of one into the other. There probably won't be a break in between, so that we should have some good final numbers for 2016, probably from the auditors I'm talking, audited financial statements somewhere around November, December, and at that point we'll have already begun. My estimate is at the end of November I'll be able to close out the 2017 year and give them that simultaneously, so they can just roll right into it without taking a break. So I'm still working on these accruals, so keep in mind I'm trying to catch up the past, stay current, and forecast for the next, but we've got budget workshops coming up next week. So I'm looking in all directions at the same time, but I'm really working hard to get you the right numbers for the 2018 budget. And this is based more on actually the info that I have, plus what I know that we've paid out on these accruals that I've talked about. I know what our liability insurance is. I know what our workers' comp insurance is. Another thing that was accrued is, for example, gasoline. We buy it, it gets pumped out. We just have to allocate what department the gasoline pertains to. So it's about 4 different line items that aren't really here for the full year. But we're getting there. We're making huge progress, and I feel very confident that will fall into the right timetable. And, I just wanted to let you know exactly where we are. Even if it's not perfect, I wanted you to see that there is progress being made and that we're moving forward and hopefully getting all of your questions answered in the upcoming budget workshops, which I hope to be as transparent and give you all of the information and answer any questions you might have so that we can unanimously vote on an adopted budget and just move forward. So I brought all of my paperwork in case there were any questions on the reports. I'm sure there are quite a few things that stood out, so I'm here to answer anything you've got.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work. I know going backwards, current, and forward is quite a task. I know I've spent a lot of time sitting down with you and going through the numbers and breaking stuff down that just didn't make sense. And if any of you see that in there, that's because of the issues which you so eloquently spoke about. I just want to thank you, first of all, for all your hard work, and I'm just going to allow any of the commission to ask questions. You answered all of my questions during my meeting, so I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Great. Yep.
Commissioner Ross.
I met with the manager this morning, and I had some very specific questions, overall general,
Okay.
which I don't want to go through all of them and take up everybody's time, but overall general, it looks like across the departments, FRS and perhaps workers' comp are not at pace with the salaries that are being paid out. And I wonder
Right.
if that's a reporting, is it because it's a timing issue?
It's actually, FRS is one of those things that has not been allocated. It has been since April. So when I say that I'm trying to stay in the present, anything that I've taken on since I started in April has been allocated, it's been put in, but now I have to go back and make sure that anything from October through March is posted, and it's posted correctly. So like I said, it's not a matter of paying these bills. They've been paid. They're just sitting on your balance sheet waiting to be allocated to these expenses. So it was basically FRS, the fuel that I talked about, the commercial liability. So these larger ticket items that are easily enough allocated, but you just have to take the time to go, okay, well, this specific employee works for this department and that one, and then just take the time to do that and do it appropriately. Having said that, I did go over all of your revenues because in the upcoming budget, our constraint is going to be our revenue. Whatever revenues we can't come in, that's the bottom line. That's what our operations have to work off of. So we can't have these operations that exceed so that's why I went over the revenues with the fine-tooth comb so that I can correctly project what we're getting next year. The state of Florida has already given us their estimates for the state shared revenues, your half-cent sales tax, things like that are, larger sums after, of course, your ad valorem taxes, your property taxes are the main source of our revenue. That's a no-brainer. We know what that is. But all of the other little things, that are I'm taking the time to look into and make sure that they are a valid revenue source. Not something that comes and goes and is sporadic, but something that we can rely on, that's going to be coming in, that we can actually budget from so that our revenues and our expenses match and we have a balanced budget.
So on that side of the revenues, it looks like that also is an area that it's not meeting what we had expected. For example, the electric franchise fees were budgeted at 126, but we're, as of now, 3/4 of the year in, we're at 48. And is that also a timing issue coming
That
in
is, that's sometimes a timing issue. You'll see that in the franchise fees. Some of them are monthly, some of them are quarterly. And also they fall behind roughly about 2 months. So 1 month for collection and 1 month for distribution. Right. So you can, there's probably, and I have got my detail, but we've probably got 6 months worth in there through the month of June.
Right.
6 or 7 months, we're still not, it doesn't represent 9 months worth of revenue. But your taxes are almost fully collected. That was due by June, as you know. So like I said, that was the main source. And then there's some other things that are falling short. And the other thing that I came across in running this report was that the budget isn't fully loaded.
Please expand on that a little bit.
So basically, when you issue a report like this, you have your budget and you have your actual, so you can compare what you budgeted versus what has actually come in. When you just turn to the last page, it's not balanced. It's off by $334,000 because obviously some line items that were budgeted were not loaded into this report. So now, got to go back in, check them off one by one, make sure that they're all in there, that it's balanced so that we can move forward and give you a better picture. And I promise my next version of this report will be more informative, easier to read, and not quite as mixed up as this one.
Do you anticipate, based upon our conversation, do you anticipate in the future, and I'm not going to commit you to a date because I know you're still cleaning, that it'll be very clear for everybody, not just the commissioners up here, to be able to say, we are here now, based upon our budget, here's what expenditures are, where we are in the revenue collections, what percentage we are, which we should be at versus where we are,
Yep.
and things also, and other things in a budget that you'd expect in a municipality.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And I'd also like to maybe consolidate this. I mean, it's just pages and pages and pages of things that some of them are redundant. I mean, you don't need 5 repairs and maintenance line items when, it's repairs and maintenance department. So I want to consolidate and restructure it and make it just, nobody likes to read financial reports, not even an accountant. So I want to make it as simple and clear for everyone so that, they can take a look and go, okay, the village is on track.
And we'll be able
Or
to check
what
out our
is this?
reserves and have a better idea.
Absolutely,
Okay. We don't
absolutely.
wait 2 and 3 and 4 years out. Great.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much. Are there any other
And
questions? I'm sorry.
just with regard to the budget going forward, when can we expect to see your draft budget?
We've had a draft for about a month now. We've been tweaking it and making little changes based on certain things that are going on and possible changes. But I think that since we've got a workshop coming up next week, you should have it in your hands in a couple days because I really want everyone to kind of go home and go through it with a fine-tooth comb so I can address all of your issues and then have it cleared up by the second workshop, and then hopefully by the time we get to our first budget hearing, it'll be a non-issue. So in the next 2 days, possibly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, on the consent agenda, there were 2 items, and I'm going to have the clerk speak to them. The Code Compliance Board minutes for July 10th and the Planning and Zoning minutes for July 17th. There was amended minutes, and so, Madam Clerk, would you like to just briefly?
Sure. In the consent agenda, we have approval of minutes for our commission meeting of July 11th. I went ahead and went back to the minutes, went back to the video to be able to make sure that I had not missed any of the information that was submitted in regards to the driveway ordinance. So that was one of the things that I went ahead and went over and took care of. The other thing that happened was that Code Compliance Board of July 10th and the Planning and Zoning Board of July 17th, neither one have met in order to accept these minutes. And what has happened is because in July we ran a week after, now in August we're a week ahead, and then September will again be a week late. So all these things had something to do with when the boards meet and when they approve things. So I got ahead of myself and already put them on there, and the board members said to me, could you please have them removed and then put them on for next month. So they'll be on in next month.
Okay, so the Code Compliance Board meetings of the 10th and the Planning and Zoning of the 17th have been pulled from the consent agenda.
Yes, please.
Moving forward, is there a motion to accept the remainder of the consent agenda?
Make a motion to accept the balance of the consent agenda with the minutes as amended by the clerk.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And we're going to go ahead and move on to Resolution 10A. Village Manager.
Mayor, I'll just read the resolution. The resolution of the Village Commission goes to the Biscayne Park authorizing the village manager to execute the bill of sale between the Village of Biscayne Park and Kelly Bishop Alonza and Alejandro Rolanda, as registered agents for A&K Cleanway LLC for the donation of a Jeep to be used for the police department, provide effective date, request to approve.
Village Manager, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, this is actually a vehicle being donated by Officer Villazon, and it's one that we'll find useful for the village. It is a higher mileage vehicle, and my understanding it's in very good shape. Should it come down, to repairs and so forth down the road, we can always surplus it. But for the time being, we have a specific use for it,
Okay.
and it will be beneficial to the police officers.
Are there any questions?
I just want to give thanks to Officer Bizan, and I'm happy to make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-39.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 And we thank the officer as well, please. Extend our gratitude. 10B.
Resolution 2007-40, a resolution of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, declaring a village vehicle as surplus property and granting the village manager authorization to sell said surplus through Cadera auctions, providing for an effective date, request to approve.
Madam Clerk, I believe you had ticketed this, so I'm thinking there's something you need to.
There was only one change that needed to take place. Instead of the vehicle being a 2006, it's a 2009. That's been taken care of in the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Resolution 2017-41.
This is a resolution of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, authorizing the village manager to execute the lease agreement between the Village of Biscayne Park and Bangor to lease a police vehicle for the police department, providing for an effective date, request to approve.
Village Manager?
This is for a 2017 Ford Interceptor SUV, and I've spoken with the chief today specifically about why we needed the Ford Interceptor SUV as opposed to a normal car like we usually have the Tauruses that we've been purchasing. One of his concerns was that we really don't have a vehicle for the police department that during a storm or an emergency weather issue could make it through the village necessarily. The cars are all, are great, but if they have to pull a tree stump, if they have to clear tree limbs from the road, all of that, the SUV would be helpful. And so that was why his recommendation was to not get another Taurus, but to go with this.
And the difference in price, I think you said was minimal.
I'm sorry?
The difference in price, I believe it was minimal, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Any questions?
And it's just to follow up on what you just said, Manager Manners. Does it already have towing on it or something like that for that purpose if there was an emergency and it needed to remove a
one
tree?
second. We'll hear from the chief and from...
At this time, I'd just like to reintroduce you to our reserve officer, Juan Valiente. He's going to speak a little bit about his background. He is our fleet maintenance director, and he'll just give you a little bit of a broader view.
Good evening, Juan Carlos Valiente. I'm a reserve officer with Biscayne Park. My background is automotive. Where I retired from, I handled a 250-car fleet for them. So I know a lot about the fleet and cars, and it's a pleasure for me to donate my time and expertise to yourself, to the residents, and to the chief. To answer your question, it is a tow-rated vehicle. It has a higher ground clearance. Like the manager said, if you have a tree or a tree stump that is down, it's not really an SUV, it's basically a multi-purpose vehicle. You can actually go over the tree stump, or we can put a winch in the front, pull it out of the way, but it does have the power to do it. The powertrain on the SUV is the same as a Taurus, but the programming is different, or the gearing is different, and it's more towards a pulling vehicle and a pushing vehicle. We don't have anything like that here. Other departments are going to it, and I would recommend that in the future, we just move to SUVs when we do order cars, because it's just such a multi-purpose vehicle. The center of gravity is a little higher, but it's compensated by the fact that it's an all-wheel drive. So no matter how hard you try, and we'll take each one of you to the skid pan. You cannot lose control of the car if you try, and I've tried. It's a very difficult car to lose control of. It's a great vehicle, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, does it have a towing package? I mean, does it have the receiver built in or no?
Yes, yes it does. And we can actually tow up to a 2 5/16 ton weight. So all the trailers that we have, the speed trailers and the message boards, without a problem.
Great. Any other questions?
Just comment on the proposal. So we do have a Dodge Durango, another vehicle that the police use. It's not outfitted as a police car.
Correct, and it's not all-wheel
As
drive.
far as the decals and the striping and all that, but it has been altered for police use.
No, it's not altered at all. It has police lights on it, but it's not a police use vehicle. It's not a rated vehicle, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. I have no qualms about the vehicle, the SUV. It's probably wonderful, and I'd like to see our police force have it. However, given other items in the agenda that we're to consider expenditures for the police department by way of a motorcycle that was not part of our approved budget, I would rather see us put off this purchase until the next fiscal cycle. Just based on the economics of it, based on the number of vehicles that we're currently leasing and the personnel that we have on board. That's my comment.
Okay.
Speaking of the Durango that we were just speaking of, what is the difference in that vehicle right now as opposed to this Interceptor? Is there such a major difference in, I mean, educate us. I know both are SUVs, so to, I guess, evaluate an urgency if we have, let's say, one SUV already in the fleet, if you can help us understand.
The Dodge Durango that Chief Walshugger drives is not a rated vehicle. It's not a pursuit vehicle per se. We don't use that for law enforcement purposes. It's not an all-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive vehicle, so we would run into a problem if there is a weather, like there's a flood advisory out. Debris and things of that nature can get trapped under the car, especially the Tauruses or the Durango, where the Interceptor, the ground clearance, is a little higher. And if you happen to go over a tree stump with the Durango and the rear axle gets caught, it's the traction control in the back of the car is single. If you have the all-wheel drive SUV or multi-purpose vehicle, if you lose traction in the rear wheel, the front wheels could pull you off of that stump and propel you forward. His vehicle is also not tow rated, so I wouldn't stress towing trailers with it.
How do we stand budget-wise on vehicles for this past year? I mean, is it within our budget of what we?
It is within our budget, I believe, yes.
So if we
Do you want the
budgeted
finance
for it-
manager to address that?
Beatrice?
Fin-
Can you address that, Beatrice?
Beatrice, could you come up for that? And the chief, if you could also follow with the need issue, because I know there's a question, do we need it? So if you could follow with that.
And this is in regard to the additional vehicle for
The
the
additional SUV for the police department.
Right. Well, in the current year budget, there were a number of vehicles that we were going to go ahead and lease. That didn't happen. We only leased, I think, 2 or 3 and held back on a few. And because we're so late in the year, the funds are there to move forward with this. And that's what I advised both the chief and the manager. The funds are there. And then, of course, we've allocated for it for the upcoming year as well. So,
Thank you. Chief, could you answer the need issue? Or address it?
As far as the need is, I'm going to let Officer Valiente speak on it because he manages that every day. I get a report from him letting him know where we're at, and I just figure that if you have a specific question, he's much better.
As far as the need, we have officers that volunteer their time and service to the village. They're very experienced officers. They're really an asset to have. I get calls and it says, Juan Carlos, we don't have any cars to drive. There are only 3 pool cars or cars that are at the motor pool that are available for the officers. These cars some of them are very high mileage, and I've been able to make sure that they're running condition, they're safe for the residents and for the officers. I've been basically rebuilding them with a very small budget. The chief has found, and he'll introduce it later, thousands and thousands of dollars in equipment. He's found it. And I've been putting it to use. If we get the SUV, we can then take car number 7, for example, and put it to the pool and have another vehicle for an officer is essentially working for free to drive because there are no cars at all. There's no pool cars. We have been auctioning off the cars and replacing them as best as we can. We have 2 cars now that I have at the body shop. Another car that I found a mechanical failure that was very surprising to me. We caught it in time, and it's being addressed. And we're going bumper to bumper, so that car is a zero liability car. Mechanical failures, and the city attorney's here, can lead to high liability because it's an emergency vehicle. And if you have a failure, and the failure is a result of non-compliance, we're in trouble. And that's where I come in and I tell the chief, I says, Chief, this particular car, we're going to need A, B, C. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, such as car 12, and it's too much money to fix, we get rid of it. We sell it and we replenish it with another vehicle. That's why, in my opinion, this SUV is needed because it brings one more car into the fleet where the reserve officers can have something to drive when they come in.
And also just to touch on the reserve program. When I had taken over as chief, our reserve program was at one of the lowest it had been. We had 5 officers. In that process of hiring new officers, they may come in at the same day, same time. So we need the multiple vehicles. We are currently dealing with a situation with one of the officers being out when he comes back. Another vehicle that we do not have needs to be assigned to that person. I mean, the need to have it is there.
Okay. Thank you.
In addition, Chief, the chief and I were talking today, he's also increasing the number of reserve officers that we have. I think we're currently at, what?
I believe we're currently at 9.
9?
But, at one time we were at 15. So for each officer that comes in, that's a radio that they need. That's a car that they need to drive. And yeah, they can double up to a certain point, but then it just gets to be an issue that, take Halloween. Halloween is a full enforcement. Every officer we have, reserve and full-time, comes in. So now you have officers that may not have a radio or may not have a car. Now, there are certain designated posts around the rec center where a car may not be needed for the interior, but if we want to be at a full-force police department and provide that full-force service, then they need the tools to do that.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions for the chief?
And I just want to clarify, my understanding is this was an item that was budgeted.
Correct.
We just had not purchased a vehicle that when
Correct.
we did. I think it was, we had
We had
budgeted for 4?
We had surplused 4,
Yeah.
and we had put into the budget 4. The 4 were surplused. These 4 were to replace it. We purchased 3 of those, or leased them, and now we've just not done the 4th one.
Okay.
Now, I believe this was budgeted actually as an Altima originally.
No, this was actually an SUV.
Oh, this was an SUV? Okay, so it was one of the Tauruses that we
Correct.
swapped out for the, okay.
Is there any further discussion or questions?
Commissioner Ross? Yeah, my concern is strictly a budgetary one. We did budget initially for 4 cars. We went off at the beginning of fiscal and made the contract and purchased 3 of them. The 4th car was held back on because we were trying to figure out what a chief situation was, and I'm glad that you're here and solved that problem for us. My understanding is then that the car that was the Dodge Durango car that had been the detective's car became the chief's car to drive. And given that we have certain line items in the police department that are over budget, for example, the overtime had been budgeted at 75, and we're currently almost at 79, with a quarter of the year left to go. I fully support giving the police all of the tools that they need, but I would like to see it happen in the next fiscal year.
Just to be clear, I just have one further clarification. If the finance manager could come up for a moment, just to be clear. Could you address specifically, by purchasing this vehicle, will we be at any risk in terms of over budget within the police department or other, because I know we're underspending in every other area from what I could tell. From reviewing this with the finance manager, we've underexpended almost throughout. The current manager's been incredibly fiscally conservative because we had some overtures. So could you address that, please?
Okay. Well, we budgeted approximately $75,000 for vehicle replacements. As the chief said, 3 of those were leased, and we've started with the lease agreement on that, I want to say 2 or 3 months back. So as it is, we got a late start leasing those vehicles. So as a result of that, and the fact that we didn't get the 4th vehicle, we still have approximately $40,000, somewhere around that, $35,000, $40,000, that they said, hey, can we go ahead and move forward with an additional vehicle so it won't impact that line item. Now, having said that, yes, the overtime is over budget, but there are other line items that we are still under in, so I think we might come in okay with the police budget and stay within our guidelines. And if not, there might be other departments that are under budget, and it'll just be a housekeeping item that I'll bring to you as a budget amendment to say, let's move this, let's kind of shuffle around anywhere where we had a little surplus and even it all out. I don't see the budget going over as a whole, the general fund, so it's just a matter of reallocating where we thought we would spend more, and we won't. We're just not, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Is there a motion at this point to accept or approve?
I make a motion to accept resolution 2017-41.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. 10D.
Resolution 2017-42, a resolution of the Village Commission, Village of Biscayne Park, Florida.
It's on.
Okay. Authorizing the appropriate village officials to execute the purchase proposal between the Village of Biscayne Park and Peterson's Harley-Davidson of Miami for the purchase of a motor vehicle, providing for an effective date. And Mayor, while you consider this, it's exactly $10,000. It's not part of an open-end lease, so under our competitive bidding, you would normally go out and get other bids. However, as people probably know the Petersons of the village, this is extremely under the fair market value of it. I've been informed by the manager. And as a result, under the competitive bidding procedures, you could waive that for other factors, and this factor is under budget by many thousands of dollars.
Village manager.
Yes, this is a unique opportunity to get a motorcycle. It came to us through the Peterson family via our officer, Sean Van Bieber. And so the motorcycle it's 2015 black Harley-Davidson. And typically that would run, or that would sell for about, I want to say 50,000? No, about 50,000. We have the opportunity to purchase it for $10,000. It's already fitted out for the police. It would be essentially a matter of putting the Biscayne Park logo on it and then putting it on the street. With our efforts to curb speeding and make the village a little bit more safer, particularly with a motor pool, having a motorcycle that can sit in a driveway and not be as visible to passersby, to speeders, would be beneficial for the village as well. We have 2 officers or 3 officers that...
We have 3 officers that are bikes or motorcycle certified, 2 that have led the motor unit, and 1 who is actually an instructor.
So we have the skill set here. This isn't a toy. It's not something that we want to go out and ride around the village and play on. This is actually a working tool. And I think it will benefit the village and the residents in that it will slow traffic down.
In anticipation of the question for budget, do you mind coming back up? So I'll pose the question. Fiscally, is it the same answer that you previously said?
It's the same answer. This would come from that same pool of vehicles that were budgeted for that we haven't spent. And the number was 39,000 that I was looking for. 39,000 is what we haven't spent. And that's where the leased vehicle and the motorcycle would come
So
from.
just to be clear, this is 10,000 outright, and then the lease would cost us approximately how much for this budget year?
I believe it's $600 a month.
I think 560.
So we are consistently still under that $39,000.
Exactly.
We'd at 29, so I'm going to
Absolutely.
figure, what, about 27, something like that, if I'm doing my math correctly?
Correct.
Okay, so we still have 27,000 that can be applied towards the overtime?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And we'll just do a little reshuffling.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I just have
Vice Mayor?
questions on the motorcycle itself. Since I'm only familiar with cars, I'm looking at a 42,000 miles of mileage for a motorcycle that's, what, 2 years old? Can you tell me whether or not that's average or what the state of that vehicle is? I'm not even sure if you call it a vehicle, but
Okay,
the motorcycle?
What I mainly focused on was things with four wheels. With two wheels, I'm not well versed, but I'll do the best that I can. Harley Davidson is synonymous with Phil Peterson. They take care of the motorcycles like I take care of my personal truck. It doesn't go, if it's got 2,800 miles, I change the oil. I'm just like that, and that is what Phil Peterson is. So the bike can have, in my opinion, 142,000 miles. I'd buy it. Me personally, I'd buy it. At that number, I'd buy it, use it for 3 years, sell it, and make a profit. That's me. You are getting a steal from Juan Carlos, a reserve. I own my own company. I'm a retired officer. That is something that if I had the power to tell Sean Van Bieber, if they don't want it, I'll take it, even though I don't ride, just for the resale value, I do it. It's fantastic. Those motorcycles, since they're high liability, the senator tell you, they are forced to maintain those motorcycles in excellent, excellent condition. So if Sean Van Bieber says it's good, because he led, I believe, the Lauderhill motor unit, and he would not get on a bike unless it was safe. So if he says it's a green light, it's a green light.
Thank you so much.
And one more question, because I guess this will also affect the budget. I have no idea how this affects the insurance, the vehicle insurance, because I don't know what a motorcycle would change and what, like, our insurance policy.
It definitely has an effect, and I'm going to be guessing, but I think it's about double what a police vehicle is. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's on.
Is it on?
No.
Try again. Could you repeat that, Attorney Hearn, just for the record?
Yes, I'm not 100% sure. I'd be guessing it to some extent, but my recollection, because I do the FMIT for several cities, it's about double, maybe 2.5 of what a police vehicle is. It is more, but it's not a tremendous amount of money, but it is more.
If I remember correctly, when I first moved here, I believe we had one motorcycle officer, and I think it was his motorcycle that he used to use, and then he got sick, and we stopped having a motorcycle officer, but he was very, very effective.
I just want to ask the chief one question, because I think we've had this conversation, so I'd like to share that. So I'll ask you the same question. One of the difficulties you had spoken about is with police cars, especially with rolling stops and so forth, and getting out of the way, that with you're there, you're flashing lights, they stop, but they see you coming, even if you don't have the flashing lights. And so at a motorcycle unit, you were telling me that you'd be able to basically catch.
There are several ways that we've been enforcing policing. Obviously, you want us to be visible, which is why when you see us out on 6th Avenue and Griffin Boulevard lighting everybody up, that has an immediate calming effect. Now, there are a lot of practices where it does present a benefit for the vehicle not to be seen. I'm sure that each one of you guys has received an email about a certain intersection or a certain thoroughfare that, why can't we just hide somebody? It's not as easy to hide a vehicle as it is to hide a motorcycle. And no, I'm not, gonna play the road runner and coyote up here that we're hiding it and stuff like that, but it does present certain benefits. It is easier to maneuver in traffic. It's a quarter of the size of a vehicle. And the officer is able to have everything that they need for traffic purposes on them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-42.
Is there a
and
second?
thank the Petersons for their generous offer.
Absolutely. Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-43.
This is a resolution of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, authorizing the village manager to execute a lease contract between the Village of Biscayne Park and KS State Bank to lease an Isuzu Crew Cab diesel flatbed truck for the Public Works Department, providing for an effective date. And when I looked at this document, we had actually 7 quotes, but we did not go through the competitive bidding, so we were going to pull this. The manager has informed me that there's an urgency to this because of the need to have a flatbed truck for Public Works immediately. I'll let him discuss that as needed. And secondly, which waiver is allowed under 19.9 if the commission so desires. Secondly, the lease agreement has not been provided. I know what the terms are. So if you do decide to pass it, I would just ask that subject to the lease agreement being approved by the city attorney. The lease terms are, this should be very basic, but if the laws in North Carolina are not accepting that, things like that, so that's possible.
Okay, village manager.
Hi. This is an Isuzu Crew Cab diesel flatbed truck that actually the bed dumps, and so it's going to be a huge benefit to our guys in Public Works. The current flatbed that we have, we've had 2 guys that have fallen through the rusted flatbed, and it's really a matter of time before someone gets hurt, and very little time at that. And so that's why I'm saying this really is a critical need.
And the age
for-
of the vehicle, please?
I'm sorry?
Just for the audience, the age of the vehicle.
It's 16 years old, so it's a 2001. And so,
And this was in the budget, correct? This was budgeted?
yes, it was budget. We were budgeted for $6,000 this year, and so the lease on this would run about $1,000 a month, which would take $2,000 or $3,000 out of this year's budget, and then we'll budget for it next year. And going forward through the lease, it is at the end of the lease we will pay $1 and own the vehicle. It's a 5-year lease.
Is there questions? Commissioner Ross, is that up? I see your pen, I'm not sure.
Based on the research that has been done and the, included in the backup is the Florida Sheriff's Association purchase of a similar vehicle for around the same price. I think that it's way overdue. It's way overdue for us to buy this vehicle for Public Works. And the only thing I suggested to the manager is that perhaps the interest rate could be negotiated, a better rate with a local bank. But I'm ready to make a motion to approve.
I'd like to first comment on the interest rate. I did actually do a little research on both the truck and the interest rate. My understanding from somebody who runs commercial leasing is that interest rate is considered quite good. I don't, because it's not a, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not a personal vehicle, the rates are very different for a commercial vehicle. And they range all the way up to 6%, is my understanding. So I talked to somebody who does this professionally, and my understanding is we got a good rate. That's what I was told.
And we're delighted with a good rate. Let's try and get a great one.
Well, I was told it was a very good rate, actually. They were like, really? So they said that was a very good rate. They thought that was they said they lease them as high as 6%, depending on the rating of the village. The other thing that I looked at was the cost of the vehicle, and then what equipment was on the vehicle. And after speaking to several people who do this professionally, once again, the rate was considered quite fair. And as you can see, it was about $3,000 under from the previous truck that was shown in here. So based on the fact for safety, I'm also inclined, despite the fact having fought it and tried to find a way to say that we could push this off till next year, I'm afraid I gave in. So I would support this at this point. Anybody else? Okay. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, my only question, I guess this is to you, John, with what you just mentioned as far as the lease. I just want to make sure us approving this today, we're fine with, let's say, something just absolutely absurd comes back in the lease agreement. We're not bound, or there's something that we can do. That would be my only concern.
That's right. Keep starting off. That's correct. The contingent upon city attorney approval would be if I did see something like that, then I'm going to let you know, bring it back, but we're going to try to piggyback it perhaps with a better. One of the things that sometimes happens is the identification, and in particular the laws, they sometimes don't give in on that, depending if they're national or not. And that's very important. We are not equipped to go to North Carolina if we have a breach
Right.
contract.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so is there a motion to accept resolution, make sure I'm the right one here? Resolution 10E, Resolution 2017-43, contingent upon approval from the village attorney.
Please.
I make that motion subject to the attorney's review of the lease document.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 10F Resolution 2017-44.
This is a resolution of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, establishing a tentative millage rate of 9.7 mills for fiscal year 2017-18, establishing the current year rollback rate to be 8.8095 mills, and establishing the first and second public budget hearings as required by law. Directing the village clerk and finance manager to file said resolution with the property appraiser of Miami-Dade County pursuant to the requirements of Florida statutes and the rules and regulations of the Department of Revenue of the state of Florida. Establishing the time and location of the first and second public hearings provided for effective dates. So it's one of the very important things that you do as a commission is set the truth in millage rate, which is the tentative rate. There will then be two hearings. So for the public's benefit, the proposed millage is declared to be 9.7 per 1,000 of assessed property within the Village of Biscayne Park, which is 10.11% over the rollback rate. As I said before, the current year rollback rate computed pursuant to Section 200 of the Florida statutes is 8.8095 per 1,000. The two public hearings that we're asking to set is September 14th, 6:30 p.m. here in the log cabin at 640 Northeast 114th Street, and September 21st, 2017, here in the log cabin at 6:30 as well. And this is whatever you set tonight, you can go down very, very easily. From a practical point of view, it's almost impossible to go up. You'd have to do first-class mail to each individual resident. So this is just to set your ceiling as you move forward.
And for the audience's sake, you might feel like you've had a déjà vu, and we did this the last meeting. That's
enough.
because we did. Miami-Dade County apparently changed their date from the 5th to the 7th, which is in conflict, and we can't have it on the same date as Miami-Dade. So really, the purpose of this evening is to change the dates for the budget hearings.
Correct.
Okay, and so the new budget hearing dates, once again, are?
September 7th and September 14th.
September 14th and 21st.
Oh, 21st, I'm sorry, at 6:30.
Okay, so September
Thank
14th
14th and the 21st.
and the 21st at,
6:30 p.m. here in the log cabin.
I'll do it again, September 14th. I'm sorry, I said September.
Yes. September
I'm
14th.
correct. September 14th and September 21st at 6:30.
Correct.
And the budget hearing, the budget workshops are, just to
The
make sure.
9th and the 23rd of August.
The 9th and the 23rd of August. Does everybody have that? I'll repeat that, the 9th and the 23rd of August. Okay.
So it's 6:30?
Also at 6:30, I believe?
Yes,
Yes, in the log cabin.
keeping it consistent,
Sorry?
keeping it consistent.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to approve Resolution 2017-44?
I made a suggestion to the manager that we call it an amended resolution, so it doesn't give the appearance that we haven't already addressed it, that we're addressing it so late, a couple of days before the deadline.
Yep, that's a good point.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay.
Happy to do that.
No
So
problem.
with that change, I make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-44.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to old business. This is the continuation discussion of the driveway ordinance, as you know. And for that, I'd like Attorney Hearn to start off with a conversation. You may have received some documentation that we have uploaded. That is not an ordinance. That is a construct of the beginnings of an ordinance. And I'll let the attorney to go ahead and discuss that.
Correct. What we want to discuss, and what I think we were very successful last time, is to get agreement on the concepts here. So I've listed the 4 concepts in my memo to you of what was agreed upon, which is that new dwelling construction and renovations that increase the square footage of a residential structure by 25% or more requires the development of an off-street driveway. 2, up to 40% of the swale area may be developed for parking. The 40% includes any driveway approach. 3, other than the driveway approach on the swale, any other development of the swale for parking must be pervious. 4, any matter on the swale area used for parking must be compatible/harmonious with any driveway on the property. I've listed 9 other areas which there was some conversation, there may be some consensus on. For example, it appears to me there's going to be a consensus on special exceptions, but the process may need to be discussed. It appears that there was some consensus for providing exceptions for national holidays and permitting for special events, i.e. a birthday, but the clerk listened to the tape and it was not under the consensus area. So if you want to go through the 9 I have and add more, that's great, because I do have 10 any other areas Commission wants to address. If we can agree on solid concepts, then myself, the manager, and code enforcement officer can help develop it. So.
Just to be clear for everybody, I listened to the tape as well, and I will take some responsibility in the fact that I didn't draft the language and such that we were all very clear. So tonight, in order to do that, I'm going to actually use both the things that you have done as well as the ordinance, the draft ordinance that I'd written, because it already has language in there. And that's for the purpose of helping the village clerk, who has requested, has requested that we make sure that whatever we say is crafted in language that she can then put into the minutes that make sure it's very, very clear to everybody.
And Mayor, on that issue, then at the very end, which will be 10 minutes from now,
He's very helpful.
If we can then list, here's what we agreed upon, bam, 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 that's going to be great for us, too.
I'm going to go for one at a time with language.
Okay.
Because last time we tried to do that, that's part of what happened. Okay. But I'm going to try and do it categorically. You'll let me know if I fail or I succeed, so we will try. The first thing was that we all had agreed on the issue of, and if, just for the sake of the argument for the commissioners, if you would be so kind as to pull out the 11B1 that you have been given a copy of. I
believe I have, that's the one I...
The one you just copied that were handed out to you. I'm going to be using that language just so that this was a last-minute request, so I wanted to make sure it was clear. I have one, so if you want to leave one extra one in the audience, if they need one, it's fine, too. And this was from this was posted on the last meeting's agenda of 11B1. Okay, let me make sure. Give me 1 second just to make sure I'm on the same page here. Okay, I'm going to start with one that I thought we already had consented to, but we didn't actually call to consent, and that was to limit swale parking immediately adjacent owner-tenant public. It's number 4, okay, not on my ordinance, but on Attorney Hearn's memo. Okay, number 4, to limit swale parking to immediate adjacent owner-tenant for public safety. In other words, for your swale, you control who parks in it, with the exception of, and I'm going to read the language that is already here. Just give me a minute to find it.
You're reading number 4 that says, whether to limit swale parking to immediately adjacent owner-tenant public safety?
Yes, but there's already language in here, so we're going to go ahead and use that language. Just trying to find it. Hold on. Okay, I believe... Hold on. I think it is. Yes, so this is on 5.6. No, it's 5.6.3 under temporary parking accommodations for special events. but it's listed, it's number C. Visitors and service vehicles, excluding construction vehicles, shall be permitted to park only on the swale contiguous to the property that is being serviced or visited. Property owners shall maintain any and all landscaping affected by the temporary, no, that's not it. Because that's, no, I'm sorry, I apologize.
What page are you on?
Give me a
No.
second, because that's the wrong one, hold on. I'll come back to it if I can't find it. It'll show up. Okay, we'll do this differently.
Wasn't, but
It was here.
it
Isn't
was.
it on page
It was
3?
C, was it?
At the end of
Not on
page 3?
page 6?
On edge page 3, let me look.
Look at the bottom of page 3.
Nope. No, that's the design section. All right, so I can't find the language at the moment, so with that, I'll just be very clear on what we're asking for. Is there consensus that parking, that swale parking, or parking on the swale if you have an approved surface, or if it's for temporary parking for an event, the only people allowed to park on the swale, it is controlled by the owner of that property with that swale that is contiguous, except for any municipal operations or vehicles, police, or emergency.
I think that that's going to be impossible to enforce. I think it's going to be very difficult for a code officer to be able to make sure that that's being followed.
I don't think this is a code officer issue as much as a police issue. This is a safety issue. I have personally, on numerous times, I've had neighbors do this, where people come and park onto the swale. They usually don't park in your driveway. They usually park in the swale. And this creates a safety issue. If I have a person parking on my swale now, whether it's because they want to, or whether because they're casing the house, whatever it is. Right now, if I call the chief and I said, "Chief, I've got somebody parking in my swale," your comment will be?
That's the swale. It's technically not your property. We can't enforce it.
Okay. In your opinion, from a safety perspective, is this beneficial for the police and helpful?
I think, again, any tool that you give us to enforce, it will help us out, yes.
Okay.
I guess my thought is, the only time this is going to be enforced is when the homeowner, the resident, said, "Hey, there's somebody parking on my swale. I don't know who they are." And then they notify the police. This happened 2 months ago with the person on 121st between 5th and Griffin, no, 5th and 6th, where somebody parked on the swale in front of our house for 7 hours. She said, "Oh, I was just there for a little while to run some errands." Whereas then the person in the house was frightened. They said, "My God, somebody's parked right outside my front window. I don't know who they are." This will give the police the ability now to ticket that car and or have it towed.
I've had several residents tell me of situations where they really could not do anything about it. They had visitors coming over. And the other problem is we're asking people to develop the swales, maintain it, keep it up, and then you essentially give away the use of that to somebody who's not on that property. And that's an issue. It's, even though the city owns the property, the city's expecting these homeowners to take care of it. And it's very difficult to maintain it if you have, I had construction vehicles on mine, I've had heavyweight trucks, and I have a very large swale, so it's a very popular spot. Plus, it was around construction areas, so there was construction workers in it. I've had people out for safety reasons. They were enjoying walking around my home because they could. I've had other people just park there because their car broke down, and they left it there for a day and a half. Very little I could do about it. I don't think it's fair to ask the homeowner to continue to do all of this and then not give them some handshake in return. So I think this is a benefit to the homeowners.
Well, kind of follow up on this point about the swell parking and about it's public right away, anybody can park there. There's actually some cities, and I believe it's Miami Springs, where they actually, by ordinance, I'm just reading some notes I took down, by ordinance, the city of Miami Springs granted property owners preferential rights to the usage of the swell area abutting and adjacent to their property. Property owners can request unauthorized use to cease. Property owners can ask for assistance from the city's code compliance officer or the police department. Officers may seek voluntary compliance from violators. Civil penalties for unauthorized use of a swell start at, and then their commission
Okay,
set a dollar amount.
just because it's going to be a long evening, we have a lot of things on the agenda. Do we have a consensus that this is something that we want to pursue?
Yes.
What
Yes.
is the consensus?
Hmm?
Can you state what the consensus is, please?
Could you read that language since you have it?
Well, I think the consensus is, well, the question of the consensus is whether or not we would prohibit the parking on the swale only to the adjacent property owner and his invitees.
Except for emergency, police, and any municipal building, municipal person who's working for the municipality.
Right, and the reason as articulated would be, we're required, if they're improving it and they're indemnifying us and providing insurance, plus the public safety issue. The enforcement isn't always going to be, it's going to depend on a lot of factors with the police officer, but at least gives that police officer the ability to go up there. Of course, you can always do civil. Civil sometimes harder because it's code enforcement, but that would be the articulated public safety health issue.
Are you okay with that?
I still
Get it
don't
off the
see.
table. Okay,
We've had situations before where a vehicle parks on a corner property, and sometimes it obstructs line of sight. And we have found that the police officer cannot cite that vehicle because it's not posted that you can't park there. So now we're saying, something similar. Cars are going to be prohibited from parking on the right-of-way when it's adjacent to someone's private property, but it's not posted that cars can't park there. How will the police officer be able to cite that vehicle?
I mean, that's going to be something that,
Right, the two things, if you do have a true line of sight, that's an emergent safety hazard, obstruction of
That's different.
of traffic that we could work on doing, because there are ways you can cite that, that first example, so.
Okay,
no, it's not
this
just
is what
notice.
I've been told, that they
Yeah.
cannot cite the vehicle because it's not posted no parking.
Yeah, that's not the
That-
case.
that's not the
For
case.
median, for example, we can cite our ordinance and add it to our traffic citation. So this is a little different, though, because the parking on the swale is the public. The village controls that, but it tends to be open to the public. If we are citing a public health, safety, welfare issue, which there's two of them, I believe that we're citing, one is the fact that they're indemnifying, so they need to be responsible now for who's on their road, and also a public safety hazard, that gives you two. It's not going to be the easiest thing to enforce from the point of view of police department doing it. The code can always give that notice, give the citation.
And police can be enforcing codes, so in that sense, they
And police
can,
can be going up, and it gives a reason to stop and find out who's there from a public safety point of view as well. If it's someone says, hey, I got a flat tire, you'd be shocked to recite for that from any perspective. But if someone's there, I park my car and I live 2 blocks away, then we may have to deal with it.
So will the police be able to cite that vehicle?
Well, code is going to be able to cite it. There's a code issue. The police can do that. I don't think it's going to be considered a traffic violation like.
but it can be, the police can cite for code. We have already discussed that in
Yeah, but it's a
Cleveland.
code citation, not
I-
a
Right.
traffic. Yes.
Right, but
So-
they still can be cited.
What I'd be happy to do is take a look at the Miami Springs, see what their experience is. If this is what the commission wants to do, we will look further in the best way to enforce it and bring it back.
Yeah, and my
It
understanding,
may be- It's not going to be the easiest thing to enforce.
but my understanding is they have allowed police officers to cite the vehicle and not cite for code. Cite the vehicle for code, and according to Skip, when we had that conversation, they can still cite the owner of the vehicle as a code enforcement violation if we cannot do a citation for a ticket.
There's code enforcement advocates, yes. I mean, when we move forward here, what we would need to do is to write this with the support of everybody who has to enforce it. That's not always been the case, and that's a problem. So that's what I want to do. I want to make sure, as we work with code, work with the police, and we call Miami Springs and see what their experience is. There are ways to do it, and one of the very helpful things, though, is the ability just to go up as a police officer and have the authority to say what's going on here. So, if that's what you want.
Do we have consensus to do so?
Yes?
Yes?
I think it's adding regulation that we won't be able to enforce.
Well, my only comment, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, we're getting consensus of whether this is something we want to do, and obviously the homework would have to be done that we
Right.
can actually
That's right.
do this properly. And if it turns out that it's wishful thinking and we can't really enforce it, or it would really be problematic and cause a backlash, then we can decide that it's something
Correct.
we can't do.
This has not been fully looked into at all, where
Right.
this is the first time that you're agreeing to do it. We then research after, not before.
The sheriff actually does the same thing.
Yes, there are several cities that do
Yeah.
this.
And we'll see how they're enforcing it. And
Okay, so do we have a consensus to move forward with this?
Yes.
As presented previously on, I'm trying not to make this sense. Do we have a consensus that the attorney look into the ability of the property owner to have
Preferential rights.
preferential rights to the swale?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a no, or Commissioner?
No,
No.
you have a majority.
Okay.
It's fine. All right, move on to the next one.
Yes, next part is, now we're going to go to 5 point, let me make sure and as I go through this, Attorney Hearn, please make sure if I have not covered any parts that you have.
Could we go back to the beginning where the first four things that we had consensus about? I think there's one that needs a little bit of honing.
I would really prefer if we can get through the majority of it, and then if we have time, come back. We have landscape ordinance, construction ordinance, other things this evening. I don't think we're going to be able to get through this. I'd like to at least get through the majority of items and then come back to that. So if we could go forward then to regulate the maximum number of resident vehicles allowed on the property. I know you're looking into that. Do you still want some more time on that? Because you told me that you were
well,
still...
what I want to do is, if the commission wants to move forward with that, then I would give it the full.
I'm going to make a comment on that since that's here. I looked into other ways to do that to see if there's another way we can do that first. And when I spoke to Skip, one of the things they said you can do for surfaces, my concern was this, in part was, you do have a max number of vehicle issues that can fit on a piece of property. If you designate the hard surface as that, what is required so they can't park on other surfaces, you can attempt to enforce that. It has some limitations. In that, for example, if you have a full rock driveway, you can then designate of that rock portion, there has to be some indication on that driveway, if it's a hard surface all the way through, that that surface is for parking. So you have to designate some way for them to be very obvious to find what is the parking surface. Because the concern was especially all gravel driveways. So you can find a way to make sure through the design feature that you're identifying the driveway. And therefore, if there's not enough, if the cars can't park on it, they have to then amend their driveway, and that can be the code issue. And that can do the same thing as max number of cars. Its limitations, however, are that it is much harder from an enforcement perspective in some ways. On the other hand, if you have visitor parking, who's going to say what's visiting and what's resident? That becomes a long piece. The intent of that conversation about limiting the number of cars was to make sure that we're not having excess vehicles parked on a surface. And I think I'm still for that, but it does seem to be an unusual legislative piece because it isn't done in a lot of places. So I'm willing to hold off on that particular recommendation to try and see if we can find another way around it as discussed using the landscape designation.
And I did put in local government to see what other cities have done to limit cars, and we got another one. I'm breaking these like candy, apparently. Thank you. And that has been the primary answer. Cannot park on the grass. X amount of your front yard can be driveway. If you got a huge lot, you can have a lot of cars. If you don't, you can't. And then there's special exceptions sometimes.
Okay, so unless somebody wants to go forward with that, I'm willing at this point to hold up on that. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'd like to do a little research for that, see if we can in fact do that. I think there is something about maintaining the look and the feel of the village in most municipalities. And by limiting to 6 cars at somebody's house, I think that will do it. I think we're going to run into problems with some duplexes and some other houses where they're going to have enough room to park 6 cars.
There is a house, I'm not going to mention the address, that can park legally. Legally, I counted, on one half of a duplex, 12 cars. So we do have situations where, especially if you're on a corner lot, my property is the way it's configured. If I had a duplex in my property, I could park an enormous amount of cars, and it would be all on an approved surface. And that is your problem with some of these.
So my thought is, let's research this and see if in fact if we can do this. If we can do this, my thought is go ahead.
So is there consensus just to table to find out if we can first before we give a direction? And the way we can gear this is, can you look to see if we can have a max number of cars, just to see if it's possible? And then secondarily or minimally try and define the driveway surface, especially for something that is all rock.
Say the last part, please.
Secondarily, if we're not able to do that, make sure there's a distinguish between landscape rock and parking surface.
Okay.
Even if that's the same material, there has to be a distinguishing feature so we know where the cars are supposed to be parked on the approved surface.
I will do the research, and I do believe there's one city in Washington that limits cars that I've talked to the individual city attorney
So
who
do we,
responded.
before we do that, do we have a consensus to do it in that manner? So at least we have to know, to have the information to make an educated decision, and then we can talk about what number of cars, how many, and so forth, if we choose to go in that direction.
I mean, I think we need to know whether or not we can do it before we can say to move forward with it. So I'd like to see the research. I was for it, but it seems like something so egregious since there's no other cities that do it.
It's going to be
And I was-
relatively unique no matter what.
Right, and I was looking to see whether or not we can tweak the language of how we describe how you park on a parking surface, some other indirect way of controlling this in the same manner. But, you know, I think we need the research before we can take a
So we consensus to at least look into it, because my other concern is to see how many properties would actually be able to park that many cars. I think another issue may be, at some point, to get some information of how many situations on a corner property duplex, which is really what most of this is going to come into, where you have excess number of cars. It's not totally the only situation. There are properties on Griffin Boulevard. There's properties a lot of places that have very large properties and therefore would be able to house or hold a lot more parking surface. Okay, so we have consensus to at least move forward on the research.
I hesitate expending resources to make breaking ground legislation. We're a unique city, but if no one else in the country is doing it, there must be reasons why. And I'd like to see us do things that are proven effective, rather than trying to invent something new, do the research, and then find out at the end of the road after we've put in all the work and spent taxpayer money that it can't be done.
And when it comes to this issue about the maximum number of cars, you know, first of all, I just don't think that we're going to have a lot of pushback, because I'm thinking about a 3-bedroom home. You could easily have 6 cars. I had a personal car, a take-home car. My wife has a personal car and sometimes a take-home car, and then that's just 1 bedroom. I think if we limit it to development of a driveway or a parking surface for vehicular traffic being X amount of percentage, 40%, or I think El Portal does 33%, but whatever percentage, if you have a large lot and you can fit 5 cars on your lot, then you can fit 5 cars. You can fit 5 cars and a motorcycle and whatever else. It's your property. If you fall within that guidelines, I think sometimes we're trying to regulate a little bit too much, and I think we can really keep it a lot simpler by, first of all, just identifying the percentage of the front yard or the lot that can be developed for parking would be the first step.
And the other thing you're mentioning, which I actually concur with, I went back and forth on this a number of times, and I'm the one who introduced it. So I will tell you the other issue is, until we fix what we have now, we won't know whether or not there's any remnant problems, so it may be something that we can look at in the future if we need it, and right now move forward with something so we can get something done. And so my tendency at this point is to hold off on it until such time. I think the landscape rock versus the decorative rock will probably cover most of this anyway. And then if there's a specific property, we may be able to find a different angle to deal with the excessive vehicle situation or hoarding the cars. So at this point, I'll retract it. I'll ask now, is there a consensus to move forward with the differentiation between landscape rock and regular rock, just to defining the surface itself? Do we have a consensus on that at this point, rather than expending any more funds?
Yes.
Yes?
No.
And Will?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move forward in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay,
And part of that would be a maximum for the front yard as well.
right,
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the 40%. I think we're still at, we had already had consensus on that for the
Yep.
driveway
Yes, we did.
design, but we don't yet?
It was 40,
20% of
Was-
impervious.
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on, you're right, we didn't go over the swale, so let me do that now. So if everybody could turn to 5.6.2, design standards for off-street parking. Most of this was taken originally from what was already developed in the previous code. There's not much, I think, that has changed in that, except for, which we already agreed on, is that if you have a dwelling that's getting renovations and increasing the square footage, you have to go back to having no closer than 30 inches the property sideline. So what I'm going to do is quietly ask everybody just to take a minute to read through 5.6.2. It's very detailed. If there's things in it you want to take out and put it as a bigger statement, that's fine. But I'd like to at least have some language that we're going from that's specific.
Mayor, in the second item that you mentioned, the landscape rock and parking surface to determine, did you have a consensus on that? Because I thought Commissioner Biltz had said no.
It was a
majority consensus.
it was a 4-1, so it's a
Okay.
consensus.
Okay.
So yes, we do have a consensus for that. Okay.
I think the ones we're looking at is not the same that you have.
Design
What
standards for
section?
off-street parking. 5.6.2 is the design standards that were set forth.
Page 3.
Page 3,
5.6.2, paren 2.
paren 2.
Oh, parentheses too, okay.
Yeah, sorry. For the sake of the audience who's sitting out here looking at me like, what? Let me just go ahead and tell you what it says. Could we put it, can you pull up, that would be helpful. Do you have access to 11.1?
We don't have internet.
Lightning strikes everywhere. We've been having some technical difficulties, sorry. All right, so the design standards are the same as the previous ordinance. There was a couple small changes, I'll mention what they were. The idea that if you develop and increase your square footage by 25% or more, that is essentially new construction because you're adding a lot of construction, so that was added in there in the language, and that means you had to basically come back to having the normal driveway standards. We had to come up with a number. I went back and forth with architects and so forth and deciding what was substantial, and that is what the number that came up. And you can do the math and you can see it's pretty reasonable. You have to have really a heck of a renovation before that kicks in. Let's see, the only other thing I changed was the idea that, let's see, hold on. I'll have my red line. Do you have the red line there? Pardon for a second. No, it's all the same. Thank you. Thank you.
5.6.2 C and D.
C and D, okay.
C and D.
C and D, which is all parking surfaces, I'll read it out loud. For dwelling, construction or renovations that increase the square footage by 25% shall be no closer than 30 inches from the sideline unless exempt in Section D. Section D says all non-conforming parking surfaces shall come into compliance when there is a change in parking surface material or the installation of a new off-street parking surface.
That was not agreed upon at the meeting where everybody came up and spoke.
Correct.
6 months ago. It was, the way this actually was originally meant to say was, all new parking services for new dwelling construction. It had nothing to do with renovations. If you have a driveway that goes down the side of your property because you've got a garage in the back, no matter what you do, that's where it's going to be. You can't change it. If you change it to pavers, you can't, it doesn't make a difference. It goes down the side of your property. And then telling somebody that if they've got to have a change, it's got to come in if you decide to put pavers in, it still doesn't make any difference. We have a lot of people whose driveways are right next to the property line. It's been like that since 1940. Why would you, it hasn't been an issue before, why is it an issue now? I could understand saying new home, new dwelling construction, new construction. Now you have a choice of where you're going to put your driveway. If it's already there, how can you change it?
Right.
Yeah, so my thought is just change C to parking, or just say new dwelling construction, renovations don't make any difference at all,
For C.
for C. And then obviously D,
So you don't want to trigger, so that somebody puts in a huge renovation, and they don't have enough. Part of the problem I'm having is we have renovations now that are increasing the square footage, but not doing a thing to require them to have parking to support
well, that's one of the things we're going to do, but let's say somebody has their driveway goes down the side of the property. If they put a 3-story addition, it's not going to make any difference with that driveway. They're going to have to put some other parking in somewhere. They can't move their driveway that's existing. And what this says is, if they got, whereas the driveway, and they say, okay, great, I've got an asphalt, I want to change it, I want to put pavers in. Putting pavers is not going to change the way the site's laid out. The site is still being laid out the same way. And as I say, originally it was at the meeting, and I very much remember sitting here about it, and they said it was new dwelling construction, period.
Okay?
Now, I think there was another one of these, I think the one that you may have written had said that. but
No,
this wasn't.
we had agreed, and I listened to the footage, and that was already consensus, was new construction or increasing the square footage by 25% or more property owner must install a driveway, if there's no driveway at all.
That's right, there's no
Right.
driveway.
There's no
But
driveway.
that's not what this says.
Right.
This is, there's an existing driveway.
Okay. Okay. So go ahead and change the language,
Okay.
Well,
if there's consensus. Is there consensus to change the language? To take out just for new construction?
I mean, I'm still of the feeling that if there is a substantial renovation, saying the number 25%, we don't know what the renovation is going to be. It could be a renovation that affects the full front of the house, like you said, changes the size, and they're going to have something to trigger the improvement of the driveway to conform with whatever the room number size is in the residence. As far as, and I guess Commissioner Bill, just clarify whether or not I'm understanding, like your issue is if a driveway is in a particular place, even if you renovate and you're not moving the driveway, let's say you have to add to it because the number of your bedrooms have changed. So now it triggers parking surface for X cars. So I just don't want to see the language change that it takes away the 25% renovation, because that still to me would trigger the need for more parking surface space.
Well, that's not what
Depending.
it says. This says driveway. It doesn't say not needing more parking surface. You may need more parking surface. And zoning and planning, of course, will not approve house unless you have enough parking spaces. This is for the house that has their driveway and their garages in the back of the property. And it goes down the side of the property. There's nothing that they can do
That'll
that
change
will
that.
change the location of that driveway unless they tear down part of their house. And I've never seen anybody renovate by tearing down part of the house and making the actual footprint small.
So could we make another exception in that section that says, unless, we have special exceptions for special circumstances throughout this entire, and that's a given. Maybe that's something we should have started with. We have, and if you would please articulate that in language that the clerk can take down. But my understanding is if you have special exceptions are made for almost any circumstances, and it's not going to cost the homeowner an arm and a leg to figure out what that special circumstance is. They just go in front and say, that can't happen here.
Right, we have language that was not approved, but has been drafted before, that this special exception from off-street parking requirements. And basically, it's not as hard as a variance. It's that you can, it's granted where, due to extreme and unusual nature of the property, a driveway cannot be placed on the property. So maybe we need to, because you're not talking about the driveway place, you're talking about the affecting the 30 inches.
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, these are houses, the driveway is already there. It's been there for 60 years.
So maybe we're going to say, due to extreme and unusual nature of the property, resident is unable to comply with any provisions of this section. So that would open up this if you wanted to. And then the grounds or special circumstances or conditions affecting the property, such as the usual size and configuration of the lot. The granting will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to adjacent properties, if it's already been there. Any appropriate mitigation measures will be required.
I guess my thought is, what's the purpose of it?
Of,
What's the purpose of saying that,
okay.
yeah, what's the purpose?
This, I didn't draft it, but this is for a driveway that's closer than 30 inches.
Right.
So the idea, I guess, being that you want to have drainage, 30 inches is very close. I mean, Mary, that's what you drafted. I assume that's...
You know what, I'm, just to not have a giant discussion on this, I just want to make sure we have, that 30 inches is something that we can look at for future. So I'm willing to pull out the 25%
Just say
if
if
that
it's
creates.
new home construction, because that's what it was. I was here at the meeting, sitting in the audience, and
That's
planning
fine.
and zoning came over and said
That's fine.
it was new home construction.
That's
That
fine.
was it.
I withdraw the
Right.
25%, so we'll
Okay.
take that out,
But just for clarity's sake, that is for this 30-inch
just for the 30 inches.
Because we have we have the 25% as well if you develop that you need to have a
Correct.
driveway.
Right.
Okay, I'm good.
Correct.
And you still need parking, you still need everything else, but you don't have to move your driveway.
Okay, is that consensus?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have consensus on that. Thank you, sir. Anything else in this section?
In
Well,
the
I wanna-
introductory paragraph,
Yes.
the introductory paragraph refers to Public Works Manual of
Yeah.
Miami-Dade County.
That no longer
And
exists.
That no
we
longer
discovered
exists.
it no longer
Yeah.
exists. We were trying to strike it from the proposed ordinance before.
So strike that.
Which one?
It's the Public Works Manual
Public
references.
Works
I've stricken
Manual,
them on my
Miami-Dade
draft.
County.
Okay. Okay.
Also,
Go ahead.
we should consider when we say 40% of the front yard, what are we doing with corner properties? Is it 40% of only the face, where the numbers are of the house? Can they take 40% of the side on a corner property?
It says 40% of the front yard. That couldn't be clearer. There's only one front yard in front of any corner house. You have
So
a front and a side.
some corner houses have their driveway on the side. Are we not going to let them use the side then?
Where's,
Some corner houses have an approach and parking on the side of the house.
Defined side. I'm thinking about my property. Defined side.
Well, your parking is on your face, is on the face side of your house. But
Versus
if
the
you had
side.
a driveway that went to the backyard, and some garages are on the back side also, thinking of the
Yeah, they
house on
come
the
in.
corner of 115th and 9th Avenue. They have a garage, they have enter the garage through the side.
Right.
So they have an approach and parking that goes to the back of the house. They don't have anything developed in the front because they don't park out there.
and so they probably are not using 40%.
So are we going to require, if they want to develop their swale, to only develop it in front of their house? They can't develop it on the
This,
side
we're not
of
talking
their
swale here.
Sounds like a swale.
We're not talking swale. This is just off-street
I-
parking.
I guess because we're saying 40% of the front yard. So the argument would be if someone develops
The
Well,
side.
let's-
side yard.
The side.
Let's take an example where you have a duplex on a corner property. I think that's a great example, where you're going to want parking on both sides. You're going to want it on two sides of the property, because that's where most duplexes that have corner properties have parking here and parking here, because they can do that. They may or may not, but they can. Do you want to prohibit that? That's the question. I'm not saying you should or
If someone's got
shouldn't.
a corner property, they can develop 40% of their swale. If they have to,
No, not swale, we're talking
swale.
off-street
The-
parking.
the-
Let's be on topic. We're on off-street parking here, not swale.
okay, if it's off-street parking, they cannot have more than 40% of their front yard impervious.
I think it's the language of front yard.
Yeah, but so in other words, everything that
Because if-
goes from the side, past the front of the house, down to the back, this doesn't address that at all.
It doesn't address it.
There are corner houses
Right.
that have their parking approach on, not on the front of the house, but on the side of the house.
Right, so 40% total.
So they have their parking on the side of the house,
So this
not on
doesn't
the
address
front.
But
that,
this doesn't address that.
because this says front yard.
So then,
So where are we allowing them to do it on the side?
right, it's basically it's silent, I guess,
Should-
because you're saying
But
40.
should we say for corner lots and say
It has to,
something?
right, it has to differentiate for corner lots. Like if we're saying, okay, it's 40% of the front yard for any other property.
Is it the front yard can be
face front-
determined by for purposes of this ordinance, by the owner?
So if they have their parking
You got two.
in back of their house,
Mm-hmm.
so the driveway
Front or
is.
side, right.
Yeah, the driveway is going through the side of the house, right? And they can have 40% of their
Okay.
swale.
I think
and then
we,
it goes to the back of the house.
I think we're hitting on two things here. Let me be clear. There are people that park in the back of the house.
Right.
There are people that park along the side towards the back of the house. There are people who park on the front of the house, and people park on the swales. And there are people who park on a corner property in what I call that in between, because they're on the back part. So the question is, we cannot stop nor, in my opinion, we've already had that. So this is triggering regulations for everything, but like if I have a new construction, somebody tears down my home, right? They come in and they want to put a brand-new building up. The question is, what are we going to regulate for that? Let's start there. For a corner property, are we going to regulate if it has to be in the front yard, the side yard, the backyard, and so forth? Let's start there. On a brand-new house, got a corner lot, where do we want the parking? Not what exists, let's talk about what we want to do now. Do you want to create a front yard so the cars have to be in the front?
I guess my thought is if they.
Do you want to allow the homeowner to decide?
If somebody wants to park in the backyard, they can park in their backyard. If they can park on
The issue's then going to become architectural too, because it can depend on the layout and style of your house. It could look, you could have a garage that's in the front, you can have a garage that's
Right.
on the side.
Or in
So
the back.
I think we need to step back and just
Right.
make this very simple. Like if we're saying, oh, 40% of your front yard, then come up with whatever language we would need necessary to regulate that side, that corner lot property now where,
Well, hold on, we just
Now,
have corner
typic-
lots. Now, what if you have a non-corner lot, and they can do the same thing? They can still pull down the side and park in the back. You got properties that do that now. I know, this is like, trust me, this is, I spend more time on this than I ever wanted to.
But still, the property in which that driveway is going down the side, it's still their, still technically it's their front yard, and I guess it's their side, but let's not dwell on what,
So you just want to make 40% of front
Mayor.
or side?
Typically,
corner
with
lots.
corner lots, we have a front yard and a side front, is what we call it, and they're treated the same. So if we just do the 40%, we don't need to
But
tell
it
people
should
they
be-
can't park in their backyard or
Right.
that sort of.
right, it should be or. We're using the word or.
Okay, so how about
Then
this?
it's not both. It's 40% of the front yard or the side yard.
Or the front side, is how you
Front side.
call it. How about that? Does that solve it?
That works.
For purposes
Right, because
of
if you're
corner
worried,
lots, yes.
right.
So we're going to change the language. So for the purposes of corner lots, they can have 40% of their front or front side yard developed for parking. Okay? Does that
Front or
work?
what?
Or front side.
Side.
It's called front side.
Side front.
Oh, front side.
Yeah,
Correct.
It's different than a typical lot.
Okay.
Because of the visibility.
Okay.
Is that the way the term is used in our fence ordinance? I was going to look it up, but we don't have internet.
I don't know. That's the term that we hear planning and zoning use a lot. I'm not sure if that's actually a legal term, but it's the common term here in the village.
Can we put it in the definitions when we put it in the ordinance?
Yeah.
Define it as such? Okay.
Yeah.
That'll take care of that. All right. Anything else? The only thing I'll mention to the audience, since we do not have internet, is that asphalt no longer shall be improved surface. That was a different change. We can have a discussion on that point. Does anybody disagree with that point? Because that was not in the original ordinance that came previously. That does not stop somebody who currently has asphalt from maintaining and having their asphalt. It's for new surfaces and new driveways. No asphalt, for new driveways. Mind you, right now, we have 30 properties that do not have driveways. If you are going to redo your driveway, you would not be permitted to do it with asphalt.
Mayor, are you in number E?
I am in number E.
E? Okay.
Letter E.
Letter E from 5.6.2 parentheses 2E. Okay?
Did we have any consensus on D?
Oh. I think so. Yes, I think so. Do we have a consensus on D? 'Cause you were-
Yeah, if we eliminated C and only went to do home construction, that would be fine then.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, we do.
I know you had a consensus on C, which was
I
to
think-
remove the 30 inches.
No,
No, you're removing the part that says square footage by 25%. You're
Or
removing.
renovations that increase the square
Or
footage.
it's just for new dwelling construction, everything that where it says or, from or renovations that increase the square footage by 25%, that shall be removed.
so it'll read now, all parking surfaces for new dwelling construction shall be no closer than 30 inches from
Right.
side property line unless exempted below in section D.
Correct.
Actually, it should actually even say unless exempted below in D, because D doesn't give any exemptions.
No, it has to be, D has to stay.
What?
D should stay.
No, I'm saying in C, where it says exempted below in subsection D. Subsection D doesn't give any exemptions.
Oh, because it's no longer 25%.
Right.
So we can take out D, correct?
No, leave D, but I'm saying in C.
Oh, on C, take out
in C,
unless.
take out exempted below in
Yes.
unless exempted below.
Correct. So take out unless exempted below in subsection D. Is there a consensus?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right, do we have a consensus on the asphalt? Just to make sure we're all clear?
Last meeting, I thought we were talking about pervious asphalt, or perhaps there are materials that we're not aware of that are still going to be able to filter.
We're not engineers here, we can research that if you want to, but for the same expenditures, I would argue that asphalt is primarily a non-pervious surface. I don't think, I think we have issues with maintenance. I think there are some people that maintain asphalt driveways, but I think overall in the park, they're not maintained very well. That's just my opinion.
I could see adding language in there, talking about materials, concrete pavers, brick, gravel, cut stone, or turf block, or other, because I understand there's other items that are out there that a homeowner is going to research, they're going to find, they may want to bring in, it might be
How about that
pervious, or
other,
permeable asphalt.
how about that the
and we
commission
wanna
approves
have
it
that.
through resolution? How about as the commission approves through resolution?
Could you use
do
a
that?
generic?
You got to do a change in ordinance by an ordinance.
Can it just be a general or other permeable surfaces as approved by,
As approved by village administrator.
or by planning and zoning or something along those lines?
No, make it should be, I think it should be by village.
Because I don't want to pigeonhole somebody to these,
You
because
could
there's
say
other
it's
stuff out
approved by
there.
resolution and then approve all the services by resolution.
Why don't we do that?
That's the way you can then be more
Mm-hmm.
expedient.
And that would also allow things for the future, so we're not tying down an ordinance to what's happening now. And then we have to rewrite a whole
We
ordinance.
could keep it as is, and then if we do say, or any other service approved by resolution.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's do that.
But isn't the whole purpose of it pervious versus impervious? And so if we just describe the characteristic of the material, it would allow for a broader application?
Not necessarily, because then, well, the reason I would challenge you not to do that is because you could end up with surfaces that are hideous, that aesthetically are displeasing, but are totally pervious. For example, AstroTurf. We have a property now that has AstroTurf. So I would argue that, I'm not saying that particular property, I'm saying in general, I'm not sure I want to go to Home Depot, get some AstroTurf and put it down and call that a day. So I would argue that there are pervious surfaces that are not aesthetically pleasing or in keeping with the harmonious look of the village. So I would be very careful on that. And that was my interjected opinion. Okay, so moving along, is there anything else here? I don't think there's anything else. Oh, the only other thing that was changed was, I don't know if you're aware that we allow very large, what's considered fill, and my suggestion is that is not, in my opinion, suitable for a driveway for a multitude of reasons. One is it's dangerous. We tried to use it for fill on our roads and we had issues. So my suggestion is we eliminate that completely.
Where are you at?
I'm on F.
F.
So for gravel parking, there was a couple of things that I asked for. One of them was to make sure we had very small size. If we're going to use P-Rock at all, it's tiny like in the Keys. And that way it also binds and holds in and doesn't go all over the road. And none of the big stuff anymore. Thus the term 70H in stone nominal size ½ inch. That's why that's in there. For those of you who recall, a couple of years ago, we used that stuff, the big stuff for the roads to try and fill in some of the holes as a base, and it ended up creating all sorts of issues where it went all over the road.
Under G, why do we have apron and parking surface approach? Which is the parking surface approach?
Are we? Which one?
G. Why do we have apron and parking surface?
I don't know. I took that from the previous.
Yeah, but it's like,
So what do you want to take?
just leave it as parking surface approach. Where are we? G.
Because the apron's the part that goes out, that's all. So it's just, I didn't write it, so that
Okay.
part, if you want to pull it out, I don't care. Remember, he's using this to draft an ordinance, not necessarily complete exact language, but
Okay.
if you want to take out such of the apron, I don't care. I'll leave that to the attorney. I had no
I'll look
problem.
at it.
Okay.
I guess the other question is, G covers the village as far as the work done for the approach. Doesn't the village have to be identified just by it being there, not just the construction of
Yeah.
it?
Okay, but this section is only for the design.
There was language later, I think, because I
Yes.
have language. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is just for the design of it, not the
Okay.
actual the use of it. That's in a different section. The hold harmless. There's another section where it has hold harmless for use. Okay? So are we okay right now? Or do we have consensus for all the changes that we've made? So I'm going to make one more move. Do we have a
I'd like to discuss the 40% just a little bit more, where we
Okay.
say impervious areas shall not exceed 40% of the front yard. We've seen situations now where, and there's a duplex in particular I'm thinking of, where the entire front yard is gravel. It's pervious, so we would allow it. We've seen situations in these duplexes where not only is the off-street parking gravel and pervious, but the whole swale area is gravel and pervious, and it's being permitted because the code allows for it.
Okay, so the situation, and this is one of these things that I drove around the village and looked at every single all-stone area where they had very large areas of stone. Some of them were beautifully done, some of them were not. It was an aesthetic issue. You can regulate the kind of gravel to help with that. You can, and I'm going to make an argument both sides, just to play the devil's advocate here. If you have a house that has nothing but trees, and it's one house is down the street from you, that has enormous amount of trees, there is nothing that's in the understory going to grow. And you don't want them having to regulate. They can't put in grass. There's nothing they can do to get anything to grow there. And that circumstance is very appropriate to have a full decorative or gravel front with certain plants that can grow up that are shade tolerant. There's another person who put in very large P-rock, just put it all over the whole driveway. It was cheap, rolled it in, done, zero vegetation, aesthetically, in my opinion, displeasing. There is no defined driveway surface. This is one of these things where planning and zoning's really job is to help with aesthetics. It's one of the jobs that they do. And it does get difficult when you're doing aesthetics to ever have a code that's consistent and not capricious when it's an aesthetic issue. I personally feel at this point that if we try and overcompensate for couple of people who may not have the same taste that I have, then we're overregulating. So I went with as long as it's distinguishing between the two of them, and you can put some sort of landscaping requirements in that may compensate for the driveway, the rock issue. Whether it's planters that are shade tolerant, you may be able to put in some language in the landscape ordinance that would help with that.
They're trees. Trees are landscape.
Right. You may be able to find a way to talk about canopy structure. It can be, you can micromanage it where you talk about canopy and thus it's allowed. I don't think we should do that. I think in this case, as long as you limit the kind of rock that's there, you will, in many cases, at least alleviate some of the aesthetic problems. And then maybe in the driveway ordinance, put stuff that would force people to, at least, not force, how should I put this? It's regulate. To regulate some landscaping pieces that will at least offset that hard-edged rock. Or you can not allow rock except in the driveway. These are things you can all discuss. So, Commissioner Ross?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If we're gonna address it in the landscape and ordinance and they're gonna travel together, then, okay, I could see that working. But what I hear from planning and zoning when they approve these is that the code allows for it and we can't deny. My argument back to them is they always have that harmonious, the development has to be harmonious, but they don't seem to feel like that has enough authority.
I guess because let's start from what we're trying to address, because there's a difference between saying someone they decide they want a desert look, an Arizona look to the front of their house, and they put those flat black stones, and that's landscaping, that's the design aesthetic, that's decorative. I guess what we're trying to say is that you then don't want that person to be able to park all over that surface, or that surface to kind of just meld also with what their driveway would be.
For me, it's not about where they park, and I know we're talking about a defined surface, it's about how many cars parking. Everybody I've talked to says, for example, if you can put I'm a duplex owner, cheapest thing I can do is go get some P-rock, shove it down all over the front, and now you can park anywhere. And that's part of the problem. The issue is the number of cars, which went back to that other issue.
Well, let me interject 1 minute, and that's exactly what I mean. If there's a difference between design and landscape and using gravel for a parking surface, and if I see when I'm reading here, I'm saying, okay, impervious areas shall not exceed 40% of the front yard for the driveway or whatever it is. If we strictly talk about what the parking surface, does it matter whether or not we're saying pervious or impervious? Then the impervious surface used for parking also pervious surface used for parking can't exceed 40%. If you're using gravel for your landscaping or some other aesthetic design, that's one thing separate from your parking surface.
What do you do if somebody wants to put a circular driveway in, and now it takes more than 40%? So they're doing 40% impervious and the rest of it pervious.
Is a circular driveway taking up more than 40% of the property? If you pave or put pavers
But if
or
you put between
asphalt.
the solid surface and the drainable surface, yes, it could very easily be more than 40%.
In other words, if somebody wants a very large parking surface and they want multiple parking surfaces, the question is, do you let them? And this comes back down to number of cars. I'm sorry, but it comes down to number of cars. Let's say I have a 3-bedroom home and I've got, I don't know, I'm using my mother-in-law's court is staying in the Florida room and blah, 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 and I have a lot of people living in a car. That means that the person next door to you in a single-family residence could have up to 6 or 7 cars. There's one house in particular that I went by, had 7 cars. 7 cars on a daily basis parked everywhere in their front lawn. If you allow for the entire front lawn to be all parking surface, then you're going to fill that car.
No. So as I said, no. If somebody puts a driveway in, doesn't mean, oh my God, I've got enough cars for 10, I have enough room for 10 cars. Doesn't mean I'm going to go out and buy 10 cars to fill it up.
I'm not saying they would. What I'm suggesting is you could have, most people are not going to, let's face it, the only reason you're going to spend the money to do this is if you need it. It's going to be a need. You're not going to just run to say, I'm going to spend an extra $5,000 to develop more parking unless I usually need it, as a rule, unless you have a lot of family members coming over on weekends, okay? Most people are going to use that parking surface for a need. I think, and then there's the issue of green space and look of the village. I think let's go back to what we're trying to protect is a residential neighborhood that isn't having commercial type activity. So I'm going to go back to the intent. To me, the intent is to make sure we're not having investment properties, duplexes, and I'm going to come out and say it, or Airbnbs and things like this, where you're having multiple people coming and parking and causing, whether it's a daily event, whether it's a systematic event, whether you're going to have enormous amounts of people in an area that's no longer residential, you've now lost the zoning intent of this village, which is a residential village. And that is what I think you have to guard against. I do not think you want to turn houses into a situation where they're investment properties or they're being cut up to be rentals for I don't know, a university student dorm. I don't think you want to get into situations where we have so many cars out there because we're using it for other than a residential intent. I'm going to ask the attorney, is the intent and the zoning laws as we currently have it for residential purposes, whether they're a duplex or regular, and not for a more multifamily or investment or rental type situation?
Right, it comes, obviously, this is a residential community, and you have different zones, but they're all residentially based. If someone's using it as a dorm room, and it happens on occasion at different places, Davie has a big problem with Casanova. It's very hard to do, but the code enforcement can try to go after that, because you're really running a business at that point. If I have 10 rooms with 10 tenants, I'm running a business, and that's how you get them. But it's not easy. It's none of this is going to be easy, even because when you talk about the cars, if they're not all registered to the home, then they're not violating it, because that's how you're going to have to base it. Most of the, when I sent it out and would talk to other places and places I've been, most of it is based on the surface and saying you cannot park on outside the driveway surface. That's how they do it. That's the tradition.
So if we allowed a driveway surface that extends the entire front of the property through rock, in this case gravel, then essentially you're then going to have to define it, right?
Right, like we're very clear about the swale area. It's 40%. Pervious, and it has to be impervious actually, except for the, I don't know if you've spoken about, I don't think you have, about what percentage of that yard. And that's what you're speaking about it now, but you haven't agreed to it yet.
Yeah,
if you agree to a number, then it gets back to there is landscaping rock
Right.
and there is driveway rock.
And that's what I was going to say. I'm like, if we need to come up with what percentage of the front yard needs to be developed for the parking surface, if we're already saying vehicles shall be parked on impervious or pervious surfaces, then we define what the percentage is, whether it's a circular driveway or whatever it is. Then it shouldn't matter whether it's pervious or impervious. Then we can move forward and say, define it in the landscaping, that we have landscaping rock. You can't park on your landscaping rock. You can only park on that pervious material, whether it's rock or not. That is your parking surface. I think that's doable, that to avoid the situation of someone just filling their whole front yard with rock and saying that, okay, now I can park here.
Yeah, I think the 40% should simply be the driveway should not exceed 40% of the front yard. And they're going to get a permit. The permit's going to identify the driveway. If it's gravel, it's going to have a border, and that's where you park. Now, if you throw gravel for landscaping purposes on the rest and you park there, well, that's a code issue. Now the code.
Permit and see where your driveway is.
Right.
Yeah, and you can say, okay, well, listen, this doesn't look like. Like I said, I think we're getting a little.
Right, and
yeah,
as long as there's a differentiation, then it makes it easier for the code officer to also say, okay, here's where the driveway begins and ends, and if you're parked on rock that's someplace else on your property that should be for design, then you're not on a parking surface.
I think we're going around, the issue is too many cars and properties. We have properties along Griffin that have circular driveways that are no more than 40%. And they're beautiful.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here, but I'm gonna also ask that because of the late of the evening, I'm going to ask at this point, if you all agree, we'll finish with this one section, move on to other business, and come back to this. I know this is dragging, but at the same point, we have other business we have to get to at some point. This is going to take longer, and we can have a special commission meeting if we need to address the rest of this and get it ironed out.
Just one point to clarify.
Yeah, sure.
While we're all still in the same area, when we're talking about the corner yard, front yard, side yard, the term that we use in our fence ordinance is corner side yard.
Okay.
To distinguish.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Ross. So based upon the changes, do we have consensus to leave it at the 40%? Because that's really what the open part of this discussion was. We already agreed to the rest of that, the changes that we've made. Do we have consensus for that?
Yes.
Yes.
I agree where it does say, it says impervious area shall not exceed 40% impervious. It doesn't say pervious.
I think we should take out the pervious impervious and simply identify the driveway as the parking surface, should not exceed 40%.
Yes, I agree with
Yes.
that. So we have consensus for that, so take out the impervious.
Can
You
he,
have majority, there is consensus.
can the commissioner restate that?
If you will please take,
5.6.23.
We're on 5.62?
yes, go ahead, Will, go ahead and state it the way you said it, because you had it done. Is you want to take, vehicles should be parked on
Yeah, I want to take out the impervious surfaces and just simply identify that.
parking surface
Parking
shall not
surface.
exceed 40% of the front yard.
Let me ask you a question. Will, you've got a small house, am I right?
Yeah,
How much space do
40%.
you have in the front yard?
40% will allow me to park 2, maybe 3 cars if I
And
can
how many
squeeze it in there.
bedrooms?
3 bedrooms. That's why I have an issue with the,
See, what I'm saying is, you're going to require people to have a certain number of parking spaces for the number of bedrooms, but there's not going to be enough, the 40% is not going to be enough for the number of bedrooms.
and that's a whole nother issue.
Then what we're talking about is the percentage, right, in that instance. So let's break it down between the surfaces and the percentage, because it may be that we have to talk about or revisit that percentage number. But I'm trying to take care of the rocking up of the whole front yard. So I agree with Commissioner, with Commissioner Tudor that just using the term parking surface shall not exceed the 40, well, let's leave the percentage number, right now it's 40%. But I think we need to deal with this impervious, pervious situation to take away from what's happening with people completely.
Okay, there's 2 issues then. We have people trying to rock up their whole front driveway, and then we have people who do not have the frontage and need the space every ounce they can get in order to park the minimal vehicles they can. We have both situations, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We have special exceptions already that deal with anything like this? Yes.
We can broaden that language.
Okay, and then we could also address the issue is if there is insufficient space, if 40% turns out to be insufficient, they can go in front of planning and zoning to accommodate a reason. We can do the issue with the car. Well, you have a choice at this point, because if you have a 3-bedroom house and you need to have 2 tandem driveways to fit 4 or 5 cars, that's where that same issue comes back to max number of cars. I hate to tell you guys. Every time you do this, every time you come back to max number of cars. I think,
Then you have a special exception process if there's a uniqueness,
Yeah.
and then you're just going to have to go in front of planning and zoning. They're going to have to go. And the one thing I don't want to hear say from a zoning board is move. I don't want to hear, if it's not reasonable. It's one thing if you have 15 cars and they say, yeah, move your cars, you can move your cars. You don't have to move, but you have to move your cars. So, okay, so back to the consensus. We're on consensus right now that are we in consensus that we have 40% and then we'll use a special exception to address those situations that don't have sufficient frontage?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And he's got the property.
No.
No, okay. Okay, so we have consensus for that. Not all agreement, but at least consensus. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask that we go ahead, if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to go ahead and move on to other business, and we'll come back to the remainder of this week. I think we got some progress on this, but I do think we have a lot of other business to attend to tonight. Do we agree?
What was that?
Not to spend all night finishing the driveway ordinance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks the audience for their patience for lack of visuals. Okay, so moving on. The landscape ordinance, I know we had talked about, we were going to bring back up. Do you want to do that now, Commissioner Ross, for the landscape?
I think it travels together with the
Okay.
driveway, so we should,
Okay,
at least, maybe if we don't finish it, move it forward a little bit.
okay. Do you want to go ahead and introduce it since it's, or do you want me to go ahead? It's up to you.
It's the same memo that was in our agenda backup last month. It's to take steps towards a first reading of an ordinance to implement minimum landscape requirements for major renovations and for new driveways in order to preserve the lush green space characteristics of the village. What I attached was what was proposed by the Code Review Board, and it's based on what they've seen in other cities. It's not strictly the Miami-Dade County, but it, I think, does borrow from it a lot. And the reason that they moved away from just, say, citing to the county is that they wanted to be able to use it more broadly. The county only uses it for new construction.
Okay.
And we're allowed to be more stricter than the
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump in here just because I did a lot of work on the substantial renovation. I did add new construction and substantial renovation of 50% or more. That is an enormous amount. So basically, essentially, it's new construction. It's to stop things from like a single wall being pulled down and then saying I'm exempt from this because it's not new construction. And we do have some of those situations going on. So I added the substantial renovation, and I think we had discussed it at the dais. I also there were some changes that I worked on the attorney with, and the language was not consistent with Miami-Dade County Code, especially with irrigation, so there were some changes made to it in this version. Also, there was a lot of restructuring to keep things in the correct location. So I'm trying to find mine, and the only one I see here, unfortunately, I don't even see mine. Here it is. Yep, here it is. Make sure. I don't see mine here.
It's in the backup.
Is it in the back?
Yep.
Nope, it's not. Not mine. Oh, yeah, B1. I'm so sorry. Yes, it is. Okay, so in my version, there was 8.3.2, 2, 3, 4. They're either different or more specific than 18A. Two additional sections were added, 8.3.1, which has definitions, 8.3.3, which has landscape maintenance. One of the complaints we had a lot, that I've heard a lot from Code and other people, is that we don't have an actual maintenance requiring people to maintain their landscape. At the same time, we don't want to be restrictive, so the idea was to have some very broad general strokes on how to maintain your landscape. And this will address some of the sightline issues and some of the other issues that were coming up with landscape. And so with that, if we can look at 8.3.1, basically there were some definitions that were put in just to make sure that we have some defined terms.
Is it in the stuff that was mailed out to us?
Yes, it's here. It's at the end. Look for a memo from me. Get your minute together. Yeah, back up, I think you went too far. Look for the red line. Did you see it? Okay. So all I did in the red line is I added definitions to 8.3. If you have it here, Harvard, if not, you can share it with me. Definitions, and then there was minimum landscape requirements. There were some percentages that were off. I think instead of 33, it was 30, so we made that amendment and changes. The attorney did, I asked him to at least preview this for me to make sure there was no other outstanding issues. And the only other thing is, if the renovation of the existing main accessory structure changes the total number of bedrooms of the premise, the off-street parking must be adjusted to comply with Section 5.6 of the Code of Ordinance. And the important thing there is to make sure that if you do a change, that the two are speaking to one another. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
But does it make sense to have it in the landscape ordinance?
That's what this is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Doesn't it make sense to have it in the driveway, in the parking?
Since the two have to speak to each other, one of the problems, and I'll give you an example, is the fence ordinance. We talk about fence and then landscaping for the fence. And if they're not done at the same time, the fence goes up, the landscaping doesn't go up, and then we have this issue. The idea here is to make sure that the driveway parking requirements, the landscape requirements, the number of bedrooms, all of that talks to one another, so they're not separate from each other. That will also be taken care of when we look at the construction ordinance and we start talking about master permits. So some of this will get cleared up when we have those things working together, which they don't at the moment. Okay? Make sense?
Makes sense.
Does that make sense now? Okay. You have to have things at some point. You can, and Attorney Hearn, if you have things that are related to one another, shouldn't they be cross-referenced to one another in the ordinance?
We can look at this, I mean, I spoke with you on this, but this hasn't been moved forward, but I think that renovation for the total number of bedrooms, we can also have, because we have the bedroom chart in the driveway ordinance, so we probably will reference it there. And interestingly enough, we have a 25% there and not a 50, so we need to see how that plays.
Yeah,
Right, so-
we can, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, but let's look at that.
I think the issue was, should the trigger for the driveway be 25
Right.
for new driveways, but the trigger for this is 50% that before you start requiring people to put in huge amounts of stuff for
Landscape.
really, really restrictive requirements, and that's why it's much higher here.
Got it.
That's why I propose it to be much higher here, not that it is. I propose it
So
is.
what do we do in situations where, and we have several of them in the village, where a house is basically gutted and totally redone, but the square footage is going to stay close to the same? Meanwhile, all the front yard's been destroyed because they've had equipment and,
There's language in here for that, I believe. And that is if they've disturbed it or they destroyed it, they have to redo it. But it doesn't necessarily, they have to at least restore it back to its original state. I don't believe, I have to double check, but I don't believe I made them actually go through having all the requirements. Let me look, I'm trying to recall because this was a while ago, hold on. It basically says if they disturb it and they ruin it, if it doesn't, we'll make sure it does. We can have consensus on this, and you can add it, Attorney, you can make sure that language is in there, that if they destroy the entire front yard doing a renovation, of course, they have to do landscape requirements. I don't see a problem with that. But I don't also see, if you have a driveway, a surface already in there, and you're parking your cars and you're not destroying the inside, I don't see why you would have to put in a whole new landscape scheme if it's already there. That didn't make any sense to me. But if you want to put a line in there that if they completely destroy the vegetation, they have to go back and do it again, I don't have a problem with that.
So if we want to do that, I would suggest we throw a number on there. Destruction of 75% of the vegetation, just a number.
Destruction of 7, fine.
Is that, I'm just, I thought I'd throw that number so you have it on paper.
Just put it on there for now and we'll look at it. Okay, now the only other section that I will go over and that I wrote here was the landscape, let me make sure, hold on. Oh, the air conditioning, just to be real clear. On the air conditioning unit, if you're not going to move the air conditioning unit, unless it's in the front of the house. If it's in the front of the house, you're going to have to move it. But if it's on the side, we didn't make anybody move it again. So there was an exemption for the setback on that. Existing air conditionings other than utility equipments that were previously permitted for those properties undergoing substantial renovation that increase the square footage by 50% or more may be replaced in their current location unless located in front of the house.
You're putting one off by itself.
I won't read it again, but it is section B. Okay, other than that, that was the only thing I added there. And finally, landscape 8.3.3 is landscape maintenance standards. The intent here, and we can do some more of this later, but the intent here was that there has to be some basic maintenance. Our property maintenance section inside our code is lacking. I think the village manager will concur with me on that. The section under property maintenance has some holes in it, and so the intent here was to kind of beef that up a little bit. The only thing I didn't put here was the idea that on the swales, you could actually put up vegetation to stop people from cutting the corners. That's something else that is not here that we might want to consider adding. And that's all I have to present for this. Are there any questions?
Yes. Let me see what section it actually is. Section 8.3.2. We're requiring people to use xeriscape plants, but then we're also requiring them to put an irrigation system in.
This is not, let me be very clear, and this is something, I think I lost my mic here. It's
No,
going.
it's on.
I know it's on and off. This is not language, this is Chapter 18A by Miami-Dade County. If I'm not mistaken, we must follow their minimum, whether we,
This isn't the minimum.
where is it?
Irrigation?
Yeah.
Irrigation can
No,
be
it's not.
temporary.
Nope, it's not. The minimum says either an irrigation system or a hose bid within 10 feet.
I took it straight out of 18A. If it's not,
It's
if not, Attorney Hearn, can you double check on that and just make sure?
Yep.
Yeah, because I think they have language in there where they talk about the irrigation system being temporary, because I think they're trying to get away from
Till
the...
it's established, right?
Yeah, until it's established, because they're trying to
Is
get
that
away
not
from
what
the...
Yeah, it's,
Let me
I
show you.
guess some of the other things are, we're requiring 10-foot trees being 3 inches of time of planting. They are actually saying 8.5-foot trees being an inch and a half.
There was definitely some work by the board to increase certain trees or change out trees like palm trees and allow it. There was definitely some changes that they had made. I went with their recommendations. I didn't change them.
I guess one of my questions is, none of them are arborists.
But we do have boards and we do ask them to give us our input, and so I went with their input. I went with their input. I did not change it. The only thing I asked the attorney to do, and once again, I'll request again to make sure there's nothing in here, or at least maybe identify anything that was more restrictive.
And I guess
You can do that to let us know.
one of my other questions is where it says, no more than 33% shall be palms. I know a lot of people that have palm trees in the front yard only, and they're beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Miami-Dade talks about.
But actually, Miami-Dade exempts everybody in the village.
Yes.
Of course.
It exempts
You
everybody.
can be more strict, and that is more strict.
Yeah, no, because theirs actually says it exempts single-family and duplexes,
Including the renovations.
and including renovations. So they are actually exempting all of this, all of ours. So
That's
whatever
right.
we do, we're being more strict.
No, because this is only for new construction. Let's go back.
Is this only new
No,
construction?
this is not, you're not,
Or
this
you
is
think renovation?
50%.
50%.
Yeah, I'm saying they don't say 50%.
No, we added that.
We added the 50%.
We're more strict, there's no question.
Yeah,
about
we
it.
are a lot more strict.
If I have,
Simply-
okay, but if I have a 17-foot home, that means I have to add 800 more square feet before this kicks in. If you want to change it higher, you can. That's a
I'm not
huge
saying
revenue.
that, I am saying about the fact that, no palm, palm trees, you can only use 2 palm trees for every regular tree, and you're required so many square foot. To me, it just seems odd, because a lot of people have mainly palm trees in their front yard. And
Yeah, I
even
mean,
when they
you
reach
can
them,
you
it's
can
gonna be
follow
palm.
Miami-Dade.
What?
You can follow Miami-Dade and do nothing, of course.
Right, but I'm saying
you're doing
somewhere in
something different
between
than what's being
is,
proposed.
yeah, it's, they're being a little bit too specific about what you can do and what you can't do. That's my personal feeling.
Okay, so.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's gone. No, mine's gone. Oh, yeah. Still mine else.
I'm going to ask one of the things I was looking at here that I just want a clarification on is that we talk about one shade tree planted for every 2,500 square feet of lot area. Is that minus the actual residence structure that's on there? Because there's some of these new constructions that take up a large portion of the lot, and then if you're looking at just the overall lot with the house removed, you're maybe having some
Special
issues.
parking and other issues, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, I believe that includes the lot.
It's a whole
Yeah,
lot.
because the way it's written is
It's
as,
the lot area, not
It's the
just.
whole area.
yeah.
not
And
not the undeveloped.
You know, I don't want to put a tree in the middle of my living room. So I think that needs
It's
to
either
be.
there or you can park them.
Just for sake, since the night is short and we still have a lot more to go on, can you at least identify us where we're being more restrictive? And as I think there's been some interest here, to let us.
Yeah, I mean, well, the big general more restrictive is the fact that we're applying it to differently.
To renovations.
Yeah, and then we're being the same or more restrictive as we move forward.
I think the only thing I know that we're moving more restrictive on is the 50% or more
Yeah,
renovation. That
that's for sure.
definitely is a trigger, because, and then that was in part done because of situations where they're tearing down the majority of the house,
Yeah.
they're redoing the majority of the house, and then we're having no landscape requirements. And I think that's where they're putting $150,000 in renovations, and they're putting nothing in landscaping, or we're not having requirements for that. I think that's where this came in to play.
We're also being more restrictive in the size of the trees and the caliber of the trees.
But remember, this is not for a homeowner that's just
I know,
putting
yeah,
on a
but
bedroom,
you said
or
we're
somebody,
being more
it's
restrictive.
50% or more. And I think that's a substantial
Yeah.
amount of renovation and cost.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we got to take a look at is the minimum of 2 tree types in the front yard, given some of the small front yards that a lot of the residents have. Putting
has
2
to be,
trees in the
but-
front yard, it's,
Yeah, they didn't, I'm trying to remember what Miami-Dade did. We'll have to look at that.
Yeah.
Because at some point, we don't have, I don't have a problem with telling them what, I don't have a problem with loosening this up. I do have a problem with taking out the 50% renovation, because at that point, you're not requiring.
Right, no, I think
yeah, I have no
that's-
problem with
And
that.
we have a tendency so far in some of our construction projects to be very creative in our use of what the word new construction means, so I want to make sure we don't let the loophole go through. I'm sorry, I'm not looking on this side. Was there any comments over here? Commissioner Ross?
I was under the impression that this was going to go hand in hand with sort of finishing the landscape and making sure that we have green space, the driveways, and making sure that we're preserving green space in the front yard.
Okay.
And I don't see that connection yet.
That's probably, I think what you're referring to, let me see if I understand your concern, is the issue of the stone component of that?
Not rocking up the front yard.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we come back to the driveway, we can discuss, I think you called it the desert look, I'll leave it at that, or the Florida Keys look. We can come back and revisit that and see where we want to go with that. I think at this point, I don't think that's been completely settled yet.
I just want to make sure we're not leaving that behind, because it's going to be an important element going forward.
Understood, and noted. Okay. I don't think we did anything today except kind of introduce this because of the time constraints. Is there anything else anybody has concerns about? Was there anybody had any issue with the landscape maintenance standards as they are currently set? They're pretty generic. Okay, so do we have a consensus at this point to have the attorney review some of the more restrictive components of the tree components for Chapter 18A? And as we're moving forward with the driveway ordinance, make sure that we're cross-correlating the driveway ordinance, the number of parking spaces and the landscaping, and making sure we're not having any conflict between those three.
As we
As
continue
we
to
continue
change,
to
by the
change,
way, so,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
Okay. I tried. I'm getting the look from the village clerk, I'm trying. Okay, anything else? Okay, so we'll go ahead and, at this point, move forward, since this was more of a discussion piece than an ordinance. Commissioner Ross, I believe you're up next with South Florida Climate Compact.
So the support that was in our agenda packet from last month had my memo and a resolution to support the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. A majority, I won't say all, but a majority of the cities in the Tri County area are members of the compact. And even though we may not be a member in a big way, I think that it's important for us, and it's important for our residents to know that we do support the Regional Climate Change Compact. and that we try, even in our small ways, to protect the environment and to be conscious of climate change. So what I'm proposing is that we approve this resolution in support, but also that we take some steps within our village to be more earth-friendly. And I'm suggesting, in addition to the resolution, that we adopt a unified sea level rise projection from the compact. It's on their website, and they have all of the tools to help walk us through this. That we review an implementation guide to see what initiatives best fit our community as suggested by the compact, and that we implement specific actions and responsibilities by department to integrate adoptive initiatives in the village plans, in our budgets, in our budgets when we consider them, and in our capital improvement plans. One suggestion, another suggestion is to reduce pollutants by by the village itself not purchasing polystyrene products, so that we wouldn't, and encouraging our residents not to purchase polystyrene products. I also am suggesting that we further resolve that the village facility rental agreements on village facilities be prohibited from using polystyrene products. In other words, just in our rental contract, as we put in other rules, that we could add that as a rule. And I'm also I thought it would be a great marketing idea for ourselves, is to purchase branded grocery totes made out of some organic or recycled material with the village's emblem on them, that people can purchase at a small price, or just basically the cost of the purchase. And I think it would be fun for our residents to run into each other at Publix or out shopping, and they have little Village of Biscayne Park totes. So that's what I have.
Open the floor for comments. Commissioner?
I guess it does say in the plan we should assign a city coordinator to implement this. They're not going to take staff's time. Do we not have to do that?
Well, I'm happy to serve as that coordinator, and of course, it will take some time, some contribution by the staff to see how we can implement some of these things in our everyday processes. But it doesn't mean going off-site to meetings or anything like that. All of the tools are available online, and I'm happy to review them with the manager if there are things that he considers that would be advantageous in his administration.
The only problem I have with any of this is the ordering and selling of the totes. While it's a nice idea, I think, I just don't see, we don't sell enough stuff as it is. I just think it's another thing for our staff to do. And I also don't see people coming here to buy the bags. So my only objection would be that. Everything else I have no problem.
Well, we have village T-shirts that used to be really popular in the village, and we also had last year, the year before, the car magnets that Mayor Crivello was promoting by way of branding the village. So, the cost is $1,500. We seem to have an excess. We seem to have more than adequate funds in our budget. And if we don't do it right now, maybe we can talk about it next month when we talk about the budget. But, I think people take pride. It's a way of, people take pride in the village when they carry something that says, this is where I'm from.
Anybody else?
I have nothing more than what you just said. I agree with this, and if the issue of the totes, maybe we can discuss it at our budget meetings. I personally like it. Having something, I've looked for, I have a sticker. I love the mailboxes that say Village of Biscayne Park, and I think the more we have pride in our community, it trickles down and it creates other things. So I wouldn't be against that. I would only be against it if it really was a strain budget-wise, so maybe it's best to talk about it when we're doing the budget.
Okay, so Is there a motion, and is there any further, was there any further discussion? Commissioner Bill, I know you're reading it. Go ahead.
I just think that we have so much stuff that's going on, and we're always bringing up the fact that, we have such a limited amount of time for staff to do anything, whatever it is, and everything is going to cost us money, and now here's something else that if we're going to go ahead and do what they say to do, we do need to have somebody do some of this, and it's staff. And I don't think at the moment, I just think we're playing catch-up and we haven't got enough staff to worry about doing it.
So is your concern that we're going to superficially say yes to this, and then at the end of the day, we're not...
We're going to do anything at all, absolutely. Exactly. So if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. If we're not going to do it, I'd rather not go ahead and say we're going to.
I'm in support of it. I would just like to know from a resource standpoint with the village manager, is this any type of resource pool on the village? Is it anything substantial?
I think we can handle this. I mean, I really do. It's a great opportunity to do something green in the village, and so I would support it. I can certainly work with Commissioner Ross on this. She's volunteered her time, I believe, to be the liaison here. Am I right, Commissioner Ross?
Yes, that's correct.
So yeah, I'd be delighted to work with her. We can make this happen.
Okay, so is there a motion, and also is there a consensus? I would just like to hold off on the totes, just to...
Yeah, the totes I'd like to hold off on, not that I don't think it may be a good idea, but I'd like to discuss more, potentially put those monies towards some type of, charity or some type of green project, something along those lines.
But I mean, from that perspective, we could purchase the $1,500 worth of totes and donate them to residents who want to use them. It's still a green effort. It's not like at that point we'll have to worry about selling them and the cash and all of that we're, had to do with before.
I would just rather see, instead of an item, I would rather see I'd rather see something that is actually green going from it as opposed to some more consumables. That's my particular issue. And things that would help reduce and help the village, whether it's, I don't know what the $1,500 would buy, but we could look into it and see what else it would do to be more green and consumer type things. That's my perspective. Yes, Commissioner Ross.
If you were going to entertain a motion, I have a motion to approve the resolution, along with some of the suggestions, like the polystyrene, and working those prohibitions into our processes. And I'm happy to hold off with the votes. So I make a motion to approve the resolution.
Then may I ask a question? Instead of being specific as to what we're going to do, could we make a motion to be in the compact and then look into these things and bring it back to us of what those items are? Would you want specifically these individual items?
That's fine. I'll work with the manager and see how many of their suggestions we can incorporate in our process.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I guess I've got one other question about this. We're saying that we're not going to allow vendors or food service providers to use styrofoam.
It's a suggestion.
Well, that's not what it says. It's not a suggestion. It says prohibit licensees, vendors of food services not use products made of styrofoam. It's not a suggestion. Most of the food trucks, I do believe, use them. I'm not sure. So that means the food trucks that we get.
It's a resolution.
The resolution itself doesn't have this polystyrene. It's a suggestion in the memo.
So legally, just to make sure, Attorney Hearn, are we okay with that?
Right, what it talks about here is we have to endorse the Climate Action Pledge, support the Southern East Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, and agree to consider integrating regional climate action plan framework.
It also says adopting further resolution that the village facility rental agreements hold.
Oh, that's a different resolution.
Is this a different one?
Yeah, that'll be a
Well, that's to adopt, I think, Commissioner Ross, I didn't see it in here. You didn't put it in this resolution. You're saying
this is
adopting in
just
the
the-
future.
Right.
Oh, this is in the future, okay, so it's not the, so what does this resolution say?
This resolution does not provide a mandate, but rather serves as a living document print guidance with options.
Okay.
But that's an option, but that is to be considered later, I believe, at this point.
Right. And by the way, just for information, the city of Coral Gables adopted a prohibition of the polystyrene, and they took it all the way through to the Supreme Court, if I'm not, they
Yes,
took it.
State of Florida, yeah.
Supreme Court.
And Coral Gables won that argument, and now they prohibit polystyrene. Their
And
next,
a lot of
their
places
next
prohibit
target, I
drinking
think, is going to
straws.
be the bags, the disposable bags,
Which
so.
they've done all over Europe too. No, I think it's a fantastic cause, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. So,
Should we have a motion?
do we have a motion on the floor?
Yes, I made the motion.
So the motion to adopt the resolution, and then come back, and if there's any specifics, we'll come back to the commission on those.
Right, and
We'll
then,
work with the manager to do them,
Yeah.
policy-wise.
and also authorize the clerk to put a number on that resolution. It's at 2013 right now, so, okay.
Okay?
Thank
Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. I'm going to, once again, in efforts of what's more important, I'm going to take 12A and once again postpone it to the next meeting. I'm going to make can I make my own motion, I guess? I'd like to make a motion to go ahead and move 12A and switch 12A and 12B and actually I'd like to make a motion to just postpone 12A to the next meeting since we're running out of time. And I would like to move on to the construction policy, if I may. Is there a second to that?
I second.
All those in favor, okay?
Aye.
Aye. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, all right. So I'm going to move on to construction ordinance. I know there's no way we're going to get through this, but I want to kind of briefly go through, or as much as I can go through, and explain the intent of why I did this, and why I spent the time to actually draft, thank you very much, an actual, I would like to call this a compilation of the things we'd like to get done rather than I'll call it an ordinance. Some of these things will be by policy, some of these things will be by ordinance. And some of them may already be covered in ordinances that we can then refer to and may or may not need to restate. We've had a significant increase in the number of renovations and new construction that's been going on, and we've had a significant number of issues. We've also had a change in leadership in the building department, and I know we're moving forward, as I've discussed with the city attorney as well as the village manager, the need to move forward with a very strong RFP for the building department. With that in mind, I want to kind of go through the sections of this. You all do not have a copy of this. I will make sure in the next time it comes up you will have a copy. It's really been a work in progress. I've been working on it literally to the last minute for this evening. Here are the categories. Permit application threshold. I've heard a lot of people complaining that if you have a $100 cabinet to move, it shouldn't cost you $200 for a permit. So one of the things that, by the way, this was not done in isolation. It was done with a lot of people in the field who actually work in construction. It was done with building departments who have expertise in this. It was not done alone. So the first one was to have a $250 limit so that if you're having a repair and it's not anything that's going to impact gas lines, water lines, anything safety oriented, that's waived. There is no need to take out a permit if I have to put in something that costs me $50 or a repair that's under $250. The second one was hours of operation. If you ever had the pleasure of living next to one or two construction sites, or 3 or 4, which I've had the pleasure of the last several years to live next to, there's something about Saturday and Sunday that we'd like to have back, and that is peace and quiet. Also, if you've never lived next to somebody who's using their home as a business by working in construction all day Saturday and all day Sunday, and you have buzzsaws going, you don't, and that's not speaking for me, it's several other residents that have mentioned it to me. They don't want to call on their neighbor, but they want peace and quiet. So the idea is to make the workdays 7 to 4, and then 4 to 5. The people can close out the site and clean up the site, Monday through Friday. Saturday work shall be permitted, but only in certain circumstances for construction. 8 to 4, okay? And then anything that creates vibration, it's very specific in the ordinance. It tells you chippers, masonry saws. It mentions specific equipment that's either very noisy or create very large vibration. That's not permitted. However, if you're a contractor and you have to get things done, you can work all you want as long as it's not noise generating or vibration generating on Saturdays. There are exclusions, so let me be clear. Landscaping, tree trimming, none of that applies. Emergency repairs to leaking roofs. and not unless it's a reconstruction, that doesn't apply. Painting and pressure cleaning doesn't apply. These are the things we've done for years in the village, and we're not changing that. At least that's what I'm proposing. The other thing is emergency exceptions. Hurricanes, there's very strong language in here that came out of several other municipalities. I borrowed language from to make sure that in hurricane situations, we're very specific about securing materials. And during the hurricane season months, there's even more restrictive on how you have to supply. You can't leave things on a roof for months on end. And then suddenly decide 2 days before you're going to try and figure out a way to get that material down. The other exclusion for hours of operation is if any site has a safety issue. We recently had a broken pipe. You don't want it sitting there all weekend long. You want somebody to come out and repair it. So if there's an emergency situation, that's excluded in those work hours, whether it's Saturday or at night. For work hours, there's delivery of materials and equipment. No deliveries for construction can occur or block the roadways between 7 and 9. You can come to 7 and 9, but you've got to pull in the driveway. You can't be blocking it. In several streets where construction's going on, it is not uncommon to see concrete trucks there between 4 and 6 at night, and nobody can get around. So we prohibit blocking of the roadways between 7 and 9 and 4 and 6. For dumpster removal, that was not prohibited. Basically, they have 7 to 6 Monday through Friday only, just not on the weekends, and preferably as they've come around on 2 occasions now at 4 o'clock in the morning, we won't be allowing that anymore either. Okay? There's also some restrictions on dumpsters about how high they are and when they have to be emptied. And if they've been sitting at a property for 14 days, they have to remove them if they're not using them. The next section I think I may skip over, but there's a very long, lengthy section on what I call a developmental plan. If you're doing a major municipality or a commercial building, which we may not have to do, but we do have to have that in the language, or if you're doing a whole brand new construction for a whole new building, there are things that every single municipality does. Okay, this is not something new. This is something they're required to do. So I wrote down and took 2 of them and compiled them. It is lengthy. I'm going to skip it over for tonight. Okay, but that is the entire section that is labeled Section C, application for plan review. Does everybody see that?
Section 5?
Yeah, that is, let me get you the exact number. Whoops, I skipped over something. I'm going to take a back step for a minute. That's Section 5, correct. So I'm not going to go over 5. 3 and 4 were owner's responsibility, which basically says if you're an owner, you're responsible for whether you contract somebody or do it yourself. Section 4 is contractors and subcontractor registration and documentation requirements. For the sake of the commissioners that got it earlier, I had to take out one piece after having the building person review it. You'll see it's crossed out in blue. We don't pay, we can't charge. It's per state statute. We cannot charge for registration. But you'll notice something in the contractor and the subcontractor registration and documentation requirements. One of the things that we don't do very well is we don't have contractors identify who their employees are. So we don't really know. We don't have them identify who their subcontractor employees are. And I'm talking on large projects, not a little tiny small project, but in a large project that requires a master permit. And the last thing we don't do is we allow people right now to run over to Home Depot, pick up anybody, bring them in as day laborers. Whether that's allowed or not allowed. We can actually ask the contractors to tell us what company they're using for day laborers so they're vetted. I would like to see that there. Okay? And that's, let me see if there's anything I left out of that section. The other thing I asked, and I'm not sure, the village attorney will have to, I'm sure, go over this with a fine-tooth comb to tell me when I've gone too far and when I haven't. I did vet this with a building official,
Yeah, sure.
and so far, he didn't see anything in here that was problematic. Okay?
Yeah.
Skipping over number 5 and moving on to and you'll notice inside this, under 5.7, there is one section that talks about parking and having to coordinate how many parking spaces and bedrooms and stuff, coordinate to the transportation ordinance. So back in the construction ordinance, we're actually referring back to the fact they have to meet other sections of the code for developmental purposes. Okay. Additional construction requirements, I'm going to go into that one, number 6. Security, site security and construction fences. I'm sure everybody's aware that's been a very hot topic lately. And so we require construction fences unless otherwise waived by the building official. There are situations where it doesn't require a construction fence, and other areas where it absolutely should, like building a pool. Okay, a full perimeter fence, 5 feet high, so that there's no issue there of having an attractive nuisance. And it talks about when you'll have a construction fence and then if you're going to have one waived. Okay. Also, if it's going to be a large construction project, just all the dust, the debris, having to look at next to it, there's aesthetic issues with having to live next to a construction site. Restroom facilities, we've heard a lot about porta potties, so we'll talk about that. You have to have them. It's a state statute. But where they're placed behind screening, if there's construction fences or screening made for them, and how often they have to be emptied and so forth, a lot of that is already code, but it's also when they're going to do it, so it has to be during normal work hours. Okay? Delivery and storage materials. This is a huge one. Our roads are not, we don't have the roads to handle a 10-yard concrete truck weighing 50,000 pounds plus a 25,000-pound truck. We've been allowing trucks in here with 10 yards of concrete. We can, and I've talked to several contractors, it really is not much cost to ask them to only come in 5-yard trucks. That will stop the compression on the roads and help save our roadways. Also, requiring flagmen. Throughout the last couple of years, I've had several instances where concrete trucks have just pulled up, some of it on the side where they're cracking the roadway off at the edge, not in the middle. An attempt to try and allow cars to drive by. I've seen concrete trucks pull up without any flagmen whatsoever in the middle of rush hour traffic. So they're violating DOT standards. So in here it spells out very specifically both delivery trucks with heavy loads as well as concrete trucks. The idea the heavier, the bigger, the more trauma on the road, and basically limiting that impact onto the building. So there's some sections on that. The next is use and storage of equipment. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything else. One of the issues is we've had contractors in the village use the village as a staging site. They have multiple sites and they move equipment, they leave it there for a couple of weeks, they drive it away to use it for the day, park it there when they come back, and they say, oh, I have a demolition permit. Many other cities I know have very strict use of how demolition is occurring, what happens with the debris that's happening, and what's happening with the equipment. It's one thing to ask a contractor to have to move it every day and they're using it for 3 days. That's not what we're asking here. That's a reasonable thing to ask a contractor to store a piece of equipment, if it's small, on a piece of property, because you really don't want them backing it in and out every day. That's more dangerous to us than having it stay there. Okay? But they can put it behind a construction fence and there's a ways to do it. On the other hand, you do not want to allow, I don't think we should be allowing, and nor does many cities allow, us to basically park equipment because we can, because we're too cheap as a contractor to pay for a place to put our equipment. That shouldn't be acceptable. Finally, contractor and subcontractor parking. Probably this is the most, this is for single family or duplex, not for multifamilies, because they actually can park on site there. For single family homes or duplex construction sites, I went back and forth on this several times, but I finally came to the conclusion we should not be using the medians for parking. Many cities, Miami Beach, Sunrise, there's a lot of cities that have issues with parking. And it's very common practice now, and it's becoming more and more common practice. I'll ask the attorney to confirm this for me, that we're having issues with workers' vehicles just parked all over the place. So what they've done is they've forced the contractors to actually bring their workers in from a different site. They can pay for an off-site, and then they can bring them in. They drive to a site location, they then put them in a vehicle, and then they commute them in. This is not uncommon practice, and I think we need to start using it. The only alternative was to allow parking to do that, but then it's very disruptive to the neighbors. And I came back and forth with the same issue of why we don't want construction on Saturdays. This is a residential neighborhood, and it's difficult enough to live next to a construction site. You add parking all over the place, and it becomes even more of a nightmare. And that's another reason why, and I can name numerous sites that we have now, where people have been allowed to park on neighbors' swales. So the construction worker comes up and says, "You can't stop me." And they're parked all over the swale for a year and a half. And they have to put up with it. I just don't think that's fair or reasonable to the homeowner. It really is not. So I came back to they can have a maximum of 3 vehicles and 1 trailer permitted at any one time during the allowed working hours unless deemed different by the building official and can be parked on the property. So in other words, not on the swale. And it has to be an approved surface, and basically it refers back to Chapter 5 or the driveway ordinance. Nothing can remain on site. You can't decide, which we have going on right now. I decide that I don't want to take my work vehicle out here. I'm going to leave my trailer and a car here because I can. So once again, using a staging site at a home, whether the people are living in it or whether the people aren't living in it, we're finding construction vehicles parking there overnight, days on end. Equipment, concrete equipment, trailers, you name it, they're having it. Backhoes, and some of them are not even in use. There's going to be bonds and things like that, which will help with the enforcement piece and making reasonable bonds to do that. The last one is site, well, not the last one, but a couple more. Site maintenance. There's very strict standards about making sure that we keep the sites clean. Also separating, it will never work. I'll tell you this right now. We'll ask for it, and if it's a problem, we'll use it as an enforcement tool. Ideally, the dumpster is used for debris for construction, and a garbage can is used for food to keep out rodents and other vermin. Ideally, that's what should happen. Realistically, it's not what happens. But if it becomes a problem and somebody reports it, we at least have to have a code that addressed it that said you have to have a garbage can for food on site, and it has to be removed daily, and it's not up to us to remove it, it's up to the contractor. Number G is advertising. My personal belief is that we shouldn't have insignias other than what's on the trucks. They're every single day. Everybody knows who's there and everybody knows who's doing the job. We don't need another little sign on every little property. I counted, I think, like 10 signs for one contractor in the village. We don't allow signage for anything, but we seem to want to allow this. I think it's wrong. The only exception I made was that if we're having a municipal building or something like that happening, you can have a 2 to 3 foot sign. That shows the project, because that's a very big project, and I think that's reasonable. The fill is just a standard thing on fill. Removal and securing construction materials during a tropical hurricane storm, there's a whole section on that and how to do that. The next one is unfortunately misnumbered, so I apologize. The computer decided to have a field day with that, but it's called the master permit section. Master permits, and we went over this with, at the suggestion of the village clerk, and the building clerk, and the village manager, the need for master permits. How you implement them, every other city has them. Right now, we until recently, we piecemealed everything. You could get 1 permit for this, and 1 permit for that, and 1 permit for this, and it makes it very difficult to create a system so that you're not having all these things occurring that are creating problems. By having the master permit, I think you'll alleviate a lot of that because there are steps and systems in place, as well as a little bit more structure on our checklist. Because the other thing that I think we need to get better at, and we've discussed this, is increasing our communication between both contractor and resident and us as to what our expectations are and the order in which things have to occur.
We used to have master permits.
We do have master
We have it
permits.
now, we do, and we're using them now more. You recently implemented that back anyway. You did since you've been here.
It was never not implemented. We're just encouraging it more now. So.
Okay. There's a whole section on master permits, and since we're running a long time, I'll let you read through that at your leisure. There is a section on demolition, and the idea is that you don't want to have somebody come and demolish a site, didn't pay the contractor. We haven't had it here, but it has happened in other places, where you demolish the whole thing, and then you leave it there, and it's hideous. So you have to have some language in there to prevent that, so that they at least have to put in vegetation or so forth and remove the hazardous materials if it goes on for over 30 days. I.e. it's an abandoned site, so there's some language in for that. The rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, 4 refers to both the transportation and the landscape requirements, saying you have to have that in there. 5 is you don't issue a certificate of completion. One of the problems also is change orders, and then getting them back into the permit so we know what's happened to the property. So you have an initial set of plans, you've approved them, you move on, and by the time a year and a half has gone by, you end up with something different, and then that's not filed appropriately. So there's just one section on, at the completion of the project, prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy, the contractor homeowner must submit the following documents, and it's as-built surveys, red line drawings, and a digital copy of all plans, so that we have a record of anything that was changed. So let's say somebody decides they have a $100,000 project, and by the time they're finished, they did $200,000 worth of work. We have to have some way to define that. Make sense? The individual permit is just a comment about individual permits. It's really not much in there. And then the section where it says inspection and compliance, monitoring for compliance, that just kind of codifies things that we should be doing. And there was one mistake on D where it says village engineer. If that's ever in there, it should say village building official. So anytime that's in there, I apologize. That should have been caught. It was not. But there's a whole section on what basically talks about inspections and who's responsible for calling in inspections. So if you get out a permit, you pour your footers, and you don't call the inspector. We don't have anything in our code for that right now. We have the Florida building code, but nothing in our code that says what happens if. So I don't put in my footers correctly. I'm not a good guy or gal. I put in footers. I mix my own concrete. I do whatever I do. And then suddenly, voila, I didn't call for an inspection. Oops, I'm sorry. I've already built it. Could you go ahead and sign off on that for me? A couple years later, hurricane comes in, wall blows down. What do we do now? I want to make sure we're covered on this. So that's what that section is for, okay? And so is 8, stop work authorization is kind of standard language. Permit costs are standard language. 10 is not. We don't charge impact fees. So I have a $250,000 construction project, new construction, and I don't charge any impact fees, and other cities can. Why don't we? It's not a huge cost. We can come up with the amounts. Miami-Dade County now charges $3,000 for the 4. We only have 3, which is police, roads, and park. That's $9,000. It's not a huge amount of money. And that impact fee is primarily for new construction. You can also, if you want to, decide if you want to do it for massive, for 50% renovations or some other criteria. But I think that's an important feature for it. The next one is cash bonds and how you do it. That's just some legal language for that. 12 is pods. And I didn't do much on that. I just kind of left it there as a placeholder because I know there's some issues with our current code on pods, also, which is a vendor name for temporary storage containers. Finally, violations, there's just some language there generically on that. Other than that, not much in it. Okay?
That's one.
Questions?
I guess, do we need to put in the stop work authorization if they don't stop? That's something that normally would go in there about.
Well, it's a building code. I mean, your building official does stop work orders through the building code.
I was under the impression a police officer could actually go in and arrest somebody.
Yes, they can.
If there's a stop work order.
That's what I'm saying, if there's a stop work order. So do we need to put that in there that the police can go in and?
It's a Florida statute.
It's a Florida statute? Okay.
Yeah.
I did this, and I worked very hard for the last, and I drove the manager, I think, a little crazy on this one, and that I really wanted to make sure we are having issues with making sure we have some laws that are helping us out. I know this is thick, I know it is heavy, I know it is ambitious, but I also know that if we have, and the other issue is, this is a piece of paper. The only thing that makes this any good is if we actually do something with it, and we don't have the staff to implement absolutely every little thing here. However, as you're moving towards figuring out what to do with the building department and how to move forward with that, this at least will give some teeth to allow us to do something for the issues that come up. And it's broad enough that I think it pretty much hit what I'm told, just about everything. If not that so. The only one I think I would ask that I may look to close down is the one I didn't go over. Not close, to decrease it and simplify it is that one I think is a little bit unyogi. And we may need to simplify that a bit. Number 5. Yes, Commissioner Ross.
So we received these 13 pages yesterday. I really have not had an opportunity to digest it. Thank you for summarizing it, and I can appreciate that you put a lot of time into it. But it's 13 pages of regulation for a tiny, tiny village. I looked at Palmetto Bay, for an example. They're almost 9 square miles, and their pre-construction and construction codified regulation is 2 pages. I'm sure that they have many more things in their processes, many more administrative procedures and agreements that they require when the permit is pulled, contractors and property owners to sign, but I'm not sure that we need to make another 13 pages of regulation into our code.
But I think you didn't hear the premise at the beginning. This is not an ordinance. This can be decided among the attorney, the manager. I've already asked to do this. What can we codify? What do we need to codify? What don't we need to codify that's already coded? But also what policies we need in place. The attempt here and the work that went into this, the purpose of it is to make sure we have everything here we need to understand what needs to get done, how it gets done, whether it's codified, whether it's policy. These are things that, in my opinion, I will not determine myself here on the dais. But I do think if you look at other cities and you look at other places, just because other cities don't have it, it may be that they're not going through a construction boom. We have serious issues under construction. And let me be clear. I moved here because I wanted to pick a place that had something built very strong and sturdy. As an engineer, I picked the village of Biscayne Park because it had homes that were built in the 50s and was not new construction. If we loosen our regulations or we're not very clear on this, we could end up very much with all these new homes and all these new additions, and we have to make sure that that's safe for the person next to them and the people who moved here, or the people that are in the homes. If I have a brand new child and I need a new bedroom and I put on a second story because I want a master bath, I want to make sure that doesn't blow down and hurt somebody. We have to make sure, for sure, that we have everything in place, that our residents are protected. Let's go flashback to 1992 and Hurricane Andrew. There's a reason why certain areas went completely down. It's because we had shoddy construction. Now, we may have the Florida Building Code, which will do some of this, and some of the Florida statutes. However, we also have to have processes in place, and we're a tiny community that has a great deal of difficulty with a minimum amount of staff. So if we do have a situation where we have to go after and we have to do this, if it's in code, at least we have something that we have. How much we need, how much we don't, that's for everybody to decide. I'm one of 5.
Okay. We've been going around and around for months just trying to get a driveway ordinance in place. This is very ambitious, and I appreciate that you put a lot of time into it, but I think that it's really something that is in the purview of the building official and the manager with regard to his department and how he manages that building department. Suggestions can be made, that's great, but we don't need the commission to be involved at this down into the weeds level.
This isn't weeds. There are weeds here. There's a lot of weed in terms of details, if you want to call it weeds. I'll refer to them as details. But the devil is in the details, in this case. And this is safety. This isn't a small item. We're talking full buildings, full construction, roofs put on, walls being put up. We have right now, how many stop orders? How many stop orders do we have currently?
I'd say at least 3, possibly 5.
Which is proof that
Let me
the
finish-
building
let me
official
finish what I'm
is
saying.
exercising his authority.
If you remember, we had people coming up in front of the board before I was here for a variance for a property where somebody renovated a shed, moved it, and had all sorts of problems. And if any of these were in effect then, that never would have happened. The way we're doing things now does not work.
That work was work done without a permit. That's going to happen. And then the building official comes in and shuts it down.
No.
The problem is that the person would have had to have a site inspection done. They would have had to have somebody do a survey of it as it was being done, and it never was done. If we had this
And a
wouldn't have
plan
happened.
review. If you
That's
had
what I'm
a
saying.
plan review in
It's
place.
happened.
You would not allow them to have a demolition permit. You would not allow to have them have any of the equipment on site. Right now, you can turn around, which we have, materials delivered on site before you even get a permit. I can't do it, it's their property, they can put it there. You can have them have, we had almost, let me finish, we had 2 stories of concrete blocks recently delivered, timbering out in the front. And they had a backhoe moving it back and forth. There was nothing we could do because we have nothing codified that says you can't have materials delivered on site before you get your permit.
We do have other
Contractors are working.
laws. We do have other laws in place that can be used. It's almost 11 o'clock. I think we should read the announcements.
I would prefer, if you don't mind, for 1 minute, see if there's any other comments on this ordinance or this proposed language and/or policy, whatever you want to call it.
I agree that we need something on the books, because we really don't. At the very least, I brought up the Palmetto Bay part of their code last meeting, because our code really doesn't have enough. I agree that this is long, and probably a lot of it can be policy. I was trying to look at Miami Shores really quickly, because I know just from knowing people that live there that they have to fill out documentation, which does exactly what I think you suggested in here, telling us who the subcontractors are, who the contractor is, and it has to be posted on the property. The property owner signs off on it. The contractor signs off on it.
Right.
They have to say who their employees
And they
are.
have a copy of the contract.
Exactly. So some things may be policy, but I agree that we do need something on the books. If I thought that Palmetto Bay was a very good example. Yes, it's only 2 pages. Maybe we can use a little more, but I don't think that, I think that we need to get something more than what we have, and certain triggers just to make contractors behave in the manner that they should be behaving in. It's for the residents' protection as well. So it needs to be addressed. I do understand that 13 pages is a lot, and I haven't even respectfully digested everything to even know whether or not what should be pulled out as policy and what could actually stay as legislation.
Might I suggest that the village manager look at this and figure out how much can be policy and how much you would like to see as ordinance and law?
Absolutely. And I'd like to, once we have our new building official on board, I'd like to have him go through it or her go through it as well and review it. And at that point, we can determine where we need more teeth and go from there. And so a lot of this can be done just administratively, I believe. So.
And truthfully, the faster it can get done administratively, the more quickly some of this can be policy in terms of direction.
Well-
I would like to see a motion at least to look at the content of this and see what can be as quickly as possible adopt as policy. So at least we're moving forward with having, moving it in a direction that is holding the contractors more accountable.
I think we're already doing that, though. We've been reviewing the processes in the building department already. That's already begun, so we are moving forward.
Can we restrictively not allow delivery of materials and supplies and so forth before the does that have to be codified? Or can we give a direction that says policy-wise, we don't have to have materials delivered and all of that happening until they have their permits in place and displayed and paid for?
Well, we have hours right now that I thought were beginning at what time, 7?
Yeah.
So the sort.
But she's talking about having construction materials delivered prior to a permit being
So isn't
offered.
that outdoor storage of materials? It's outdoor storage of things that don't belong outside on your
Yeah,
front lawn?
if we can start enforcing that, probably based on outdoor storage. It's litter at some point if you're leaving it there. We can find a way to do it now.
Okay. Because that will stop the,
But-
you can't do a legal permit in building. It's going to be very difficult to do without materials. If you can stop the materials, you can stop some of the illegal
If you have the
construction.
materials, that's right. You can't have the storage there. We'll look at that ordinance. We should be able to cite that way. You can cite for a lot of, you're killing the grass if you're doing it. You're not seeking a permit. You're not actually seeking a permit. We can look at all that. The key here is getting our building official, whoever that is,
to work with us very quickly as soon as we have that individual. But in the meantime, we'll use everything we can to enforce that example. That example doesn't exist, we can do it as a policy. But to make it a law, we're not going to do that in
No, I
months
understand.
anyway, so we have to use what we have now.
I'm trying to get something in place for that, and then also inspections and calling for inspections to make sure things like concrete footers and safety things are absolutely, those are, to me, key.
Yeah, those are already happening. I mean,
We're
that's,
not building illegally.
right, well, I mean, there's no way we can catch everyone building illegally all the time either. That,
No, but
you know,
putting, what I'm saying is the major issues of additions being placed on, these are substantial
Right.
things that require construction materials. If we stop the construction materials, we stop a lot.
Okay.
Okay, it is late.
It's 10:57, so.
Yeah.
I thank you all for your patience in allowing me to get through that. Village attorney, do you have any additions?
It's 10:57. I can tell you, I checked with the county on on county roads. They'll let us enforce that. They would like to see what we pass. I followed up, chasing down the mortgage company. A lot of dissolutions, but we have a letter that's out to who we believe the company is. We're also actively working. If anyone else is interested in helping to fix that property through a purchase, we can go through code enforcement through the mitigation process of fines. If they get a contract, we're working that way much quicker if that happens. Dan Samari asked a question about whether he's allowed to collect. He does have, is that part of the
No,
parks?
okay, I got clarification on that. What he was asking for the board was whether or not he has a 9/11 collection, which is a display. It's not any money.
Oh, whether he can
collecting.
display it.
Right, so he wanted permission to display it for us to waive the fee for him doing that into the rec center or making sure there's no cost.
Okay, so the commission's amenable to do that, I guess.
Yes, are we
Yes.
ready to do that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay,
Okay, and it's 10:58, not done.
all right.
Otherwise, you gotta vote.
Madam Clerk.
We have a lot of announcements to make tonight. Friday, August 4th, we have, this Friday, we're going to have a welcome back party for Mr. Isa Thornell that started working with us today between 6 and 7 here at the Log Cabin. It's being hosted by Creepy Critters Pest Control. Monday, August 7th, Planning and Zoning Board at 6:30. Wednesday, August 9th, is our first budget workshop at 6:30 here at the Log Cabin. Monday, August 14th, is the co-compliance at 7 p.m. Wednesday, August 16th, is Park and Parkways Advisory Board at 6 p.m. Monday, August 21st, is Planning and Zoning at 6:30. Wednesday, August 23rd, is the second budget workshop at 6:30. Did I say that twice? Monday, September 4th is Labor Day, so all village departments will be closed. That same day is the same day that Planning and Zoning is also supposed to be having their meeting. So their meeting is now tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, September 5th, or Wednesday, September 6th at 6:30. Once I get confirmation, it'll be placed on our calendar. Monday, September 11th, is Biscayne Park Foundation at 7 p.m., and it is also co-compliance at 7 p.m. And our next regularly scheduled meeting is Tuesday, September 12th at 7 p.m. Thank you very much. Good night. Is there a
to adjourn?
motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye?